In the clock tower of East Balham Dock, Klein hid in the darkness while donning a clown mask as he quietly stared at the dormitory of the dock union. An airship floated above. He couldn't see the details of the battle, and he had no way of knowing the developments of the operation in the red brick building. All he could do was endure and determine the situation by observing the changes in the surroundings and the occasional black dot that passed by. Just then he saw all the gas lamps in the area extinguish. All of them had been extinguished. It was pitch black there. Right on the heels of that, a feeling that left an extremely deep impression on him exploded from the small red brick building. Even from a long distance away, Klein couldn't help but tremble all over. His legs went soft and he bent his waist. It was the feeling of being looked down upon, a feeling that repressed one's spirit. It was a feeling that was impossible to resist or face. No, don't look directly at God. In his adrift thoughts, Klein seemed to recall the time when he was in the hall of the Blackthorn Security Company. It was like when he was about to activate his spirit vision to probe the mental state of Megos and the baby in her womb. That feeling was exactly the same as it was now. No, it's even more extreme and terrifying right now. How could this be? Wasn't Lenivis just bestowed with a little bit of the true Creator's godhood? At most he would be given one or two other corresponding items. Why does it feel like an evil god is about to descend? Before Klein could shake off the trembling of his body and the numbing of his thoughts, he suddenly felt a deep, serene and profound darkness engulfing the feeling that couldn't be looked at, probed, or resisted. The two sensations were obliterated at the same time, causing the gas lamps in the surrounding area to light up once again. The airship, which couldn't stop itself from plummeting, floated back up again. Everything seemed to return to its original state without the slightest change. But Klein didn't believe that everything was over. He stood up with all his might, knowing that something important had happened in the red brick building. The feeling that exceeds a beyonder at a fundamental level is no longer there, nor is there the feeling of the descent of an evil god. This means that the true Creator or Lenivis's plot has failed. However, the Nighthawks must have suffered some sort of serious blow as well. They might not even have much strength left. At that moment Klein's heart stirred. He quickly took out the spirit pendulum inside his left sleeve, holding it with one hand as he said in a low voice, "Lenivis is no longer dangerous at the moment." After quickly repeating it 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw that the topaz pendant was rotating counterclockwise. However, its frequency wasn't fast and its amplitude wasn't large. This showed that Lenivis was still a dangerous man, but to a lesser degree. What caught Klein's attention was something else. The divination hadn't failed again. This meant that Lenivis had been separated from the godhood bestowed upon him by the true Creator. A cold wind blew, seeping deep into Klein's bones, causing him to shiver. He felt as if an electric current had instantly drilled into his brain from the soles of his feet. Maybe I can do something. He suddenly had this thought and no longer hesitated. He took 4 steps counterclockwise in the dark clock tower and went above the gray fog. Without wasting any time, he sat down and conjured a piece of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and wrote a divination statement. Lenivis's escape route. Klein leaned back, quickly chanted the statement and entered a deep dream. In that illusory, separated, misty world, he saw the slush-filled sewers with their dark, dirty tunnels and rusty metal pipes. It was cramped and sealed. It's the sewers. Klein immediately woke up, enveloped his body with spirituality, and descended into the gray fog. As soon as he returned to the real world, he took a few steps back and came to the side of the clock tower that faced away from the airship. Klein didn't walk down the spiral stairs but instead somersaulted over the dark yellow fence. With the help of the platform, the bulging spots, and the decorations on the surface of the building, he jumped down level by level. His body was so balanced it was as though he was walking on the ground. In a very short period of time, his feet stepped on the thick flagstones on the street. Inside the small red brick building, 2 Nighthawks wearing red gloves had collapsed by the door unconscious. The ancient silver-plated mirror had rolled to a corner, but it was no longer special. It no longer looked anything like a Grade 1 sealed artifact. However, one could clearly feel that it was recovering bit by bit. Crestet Sesamir was kneeling at an intersection. A stream of tear-like blood streaked down the corners of his eyes. His short golden-brown hair hung limply, and his standing collars on his windbreaker and shirt were in tatters, revealing his relatively sharp chin and his thin, stiff mouth. Gasping for air, A distorted, semi-illusory and translucent face appeared on each of his teeth. Casimir braced himself with his left red-gloved hand on the ground. With difficulty, he straightened his neck and looked straight ahead. Directly in front of him was the staircase to the second floor, above which stood Lenivas, who had his linen shirt completely unbuttoned. Lenivas stood very straight with the pure white, smooth bone sword stuck in his chest. The skinless flesh no longer formed the outline of the hanging man's figure, leaving behind a void. Vaguely, one could even see his back through the hole in Lenivas's body. Lenivas moved with great difficulty before suddenly laughing loudly. He said with a maniacal laugh, "Ha ha, thank you. I really need to thank you. For real. Look at my sincere eyes. I really want to thank you. If you hadn't discovered me and arrived in time, I would truly become the vessel of the true Creator when he descends in a few months. When that happens, how different would it be from dying?" Casimir was stunned when he heard that. He refused to believe that the person who had his crutch destroyed thanks to his hard work would be so happy. At that moment he wished to stand, but he couldn't. He was also powerless to resist. When Lenivas saw his confusion, he coughed and said with a smile, "Do you know? To people like me, it's the most miserable thing when there's no one to share a great accomplishment that I'm proud of. When I was in Tinjin City, I was deceived by the true Creator, who not only initiated the descent of his spawn, but he also secretly planted a sapling in my body. No, I even believe that Magost's child was just his ruse. He didn't even get the members of the Aurora Order to protect her to divert attention. It was as though he knew from the beginning that the ploy would end in failure. His true descent was set up inside me. The godhood he bestowed upon me suddenly combined with the sapling in my body after I reached Backland. Can you imagine that? I was being replaced bit by him. In the end, I would become the true Creator. Before I came up with a solution, I was found by the members of the Aurora Order through the godhood. Thankfully, they're all lunatics with simple brains. There are always so many fools." Cough, cough, cough. Lenivas spat out a mouthful of foul blood, seemingly recovering some of his mobility. He took a difficult step forward, and his chiseled face suddenly turned soft for some unknown reason as he began resembling his original self. Lenivas reached out to the staircase's handrail and laughed tauntingly. "Thankfully, if the true Creator wishes to fully descend and completely replace me, he'll need large amounts of pessimism, despair, numbness, resentment and primitive evil. Only Backland, only East Borough, the factory and dock area, could satisfy his requirements. This gave me a chance to interact with others. I knew that it was unrealistic to report this to the police simply through the people I interacted with, because the people I come in contact could very well be members of the Aurora Order. I initially wanted to instigate a strike to get the police to notice me, but I was warned by someone from the Aurora Order. After being tortured, I could only hastily end it. I acted as though I was on the brink of losing control and had gained the opportunity to head into the sewers to vent. During this process, I secretly used my blood to corrupt the creatures living in there, turning them into terrifying mutated monsters. Unfortunately, before you could fully investigate the reason behind it, it was discovered by the Aurora Order. Apparently, a member of theirs died under a mutated monster. Now that I no longer have the godhood or the sapling, my blood no longer has such effects. After that, I was controlled even more strictly, but I still found an opportunity. I killed a prostitute and used the cruelest method to attract the attention of the police. But who would have thought that the people of the Aurora Order would disguise the case as part of series of serial murders? I still failed to receive the rescue I needed. Out of similar opportunities, I could only use a more ingenious method. I took the initiative to request for the fiercest, craziest, most radical member of the Aurora Order to watch me, and this suited their thoughts. Can't they use their brains? Such a lunatic would get into trouble at any moment. As expected, you guys came. Phew. At that moment, Lenivas exhaled and began to move his body, as if he had finally gotten rid of the remnant effects. He pulled out the holy bone sword from his chest and said regretfully, "What a pity. I can't take it with me. Otherwise I would be quickly tracked and found by you." After the pure white bone sword completely separated from his body, not a single drop of blood remained from the exaggerated wound. The part that had disappeared didn't seem to belong to Lenivas. Lenivas pressed his right hand against his chest, bowing as he faced Crestet Casimir and company. The people on the airship outside should be recovering soon. I can't stay any longer. Thank you very much. Although you're all very stupid, you still ultimately helped me. It's an honor for foolish bastards like yourselves." Having said this, he straightened his body and smiled tauntingly. "Goodbye, foolish Nighthawks. Use your lives to send me off." Grasping the bone sword in his hand, he abruptly took a few steps forward, attempting to stab at S27. But at that moment his eyelids began to grow heavy, as he felt like collapsing into a slumber. "So you still have some strength. This is troublesome." Lenivus bit his tongue gently and suddenly threw the holy bone sword at the unconscious Nighthawk by the door. "No." Sesamir waved his hand with the strength he accumulated through painstaking means, causing an invisible entity to divert the holy bone sword. Lenivus seized that opportunity and dashed to the side. He somersaulted out the red brick building through the window at the washroom at the end of the corridor. Soon after, he opened a manhole cover along the streets and quickly climbed into the sewers. Lenivus seemed to be very familiar with this place. Even though it was dark, he could still run, jump, and turn, quickly fleeing deep into the maze of sewers. Suddenly he instinctively stopped and leaned back. A card had stabbed deep into his right chest and blood began dripping profusely from its edge. Lenivus looked up and with his ability to see in the dark, he saw his attacker. It was a medium-sized man in a worker's uniform, wearing a mask with a raised mouth and red nose. It was a happy clown. The moment their eyes met, Lenivus suddenly ducked and rolled forward. Clang! A tarot card with an angel and trumpet shot out sharply like a dagger, embedding itself into the wall of the sewer, and its position was at the same height as Lenivus's neck just moments before. Clang! 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 Lenivus either rolled, jumped to his side, or threw himself forward, nimbly avoiding the three cards that came in succession with abnormal agility. Their collision with the walls, slabs, and concrete echoed like metal striking a wall. Meanwhile, out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the man in the clown mask was following him closely, not much slower than he was. In his hand was a thick stack of cards as he launched them with great familiarity and skill. On the surface of an approaching card was a sun with 5 facial features. With his left hand, Lenivus propped himself up against the wall and leaped into the air, drastically changing his course. At that moment he heard a swishing sound before suddenly feeling a sharp pain in his ankle. He launched 2 cards. One arrived slightly late and was aimed in the direction I was escaping in. Can he foresee my movements? The moment he landed on the ground, Lenivus endured the pain and rolled once again. Clang! Another tarot card embedded itself into his original position, resonating constantly in response to the impact. It was only then that Lenivus noticed a card deeply embedded in his right ankle. The card depicting stars, water containers, and holy water stained in red. So. Lenivus didn't even have the luxury of time to think or treat his injuries. One after another, the cards turned into seemingly sharp flying daggers, shooting at different parts of his body. Very soon, the injuries on his right leg and chest and the remnant effects from the hole in his chest, as well as the prior demigod-level clash, caused this Sequence 9 marauder to turn sluggish. This was in contrast to the nimbleness and speed that marauders were known for. Pow! He sent a card flying, but a deep laceration tore through his wrist, one that kept bleeding profusely. The Nighthawks and the military will be coming soon. I can't delay any longer. At this moment, Lenivus's mind was very clear. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and stopped dodging, allowing a card depicting the devil to strike him squarely in the neck. In almost an instant, the cards sticking out from his body were sent flying. The hideous wounds on his neck, right chest, wrist, and ankle were all squirming madly, sprouting one meat tendril after another in disgusting shapes. On his skin, numerous small goosebumps appeared. These goosebumps had a metallic tint to them, as if they had turned into a set of armor. Clang! A tarot card was shot over, but it was deflected by the fine goosebumps. With bloodshot eyes, Lenivus stared at the clown who had put away his cards after coming to a halt. He said, half laughing and half mocking, "No matter what, after being tormented by a deity, one will always get something in return." Before he could finish his words, he had already jumped over the polluted waters in the canal with his left foot, throwing himself at the enemy opposite him. As if expecting this, Klein stepped to the side, pulled his left hand out of his pocket, clenched it into a fist and threw it at Lenivus's temple. Bam! Lenivus swung his elbow sideways and raised his forearm, accurately hitting his opponent's fist. The explosive force surged like a torrential tide, causing Klein's body to move from the impact as he staggered a little. Pop, pop, pop. Crisp explosive blasts sounded in Klein's ear. Punches, each heavier and faster than the last, constantly reflected into his eyes. The flurry of attacks made him seem to forget to maintain his balance. He staggered and fell to the side, then with the support of his left elbow he rolled in a different direction. Smack, 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 bang, bang, bang. Lenivus's punches and kicks came quickly and furiously, almost hitting Klein quite a few times, but thanks to his exaggerated balance and movements that defied common sense, he managed to dodge successfully. At times he would be on the wall and at other times on the ground. It was as though he was performing an acrobatic act. He appeared very calm without the slightest bit of impatience. It was as though he had decided to drag out the battle as long as possible until the Nighthawks and the military arrived. And once there were any signs of Lenivus's attempting to escape, he was hell-bent on pestering him and not give him an opportunity to do so. Pop. Lenivus's punch forced Klein to use the rebound from the wall to fly back into the air, and as for him himself, he didn't hesitate to turn around and flee towards another tunnel. The moment Klein's toes touched the ground, his body shot out like a cannonball as he pounced straight for Lenivus's back. At that moment an image appeared in his mind. It seems as if Lenivus has no bones. I should force him to twist his upper body and land a punch on his body. This was a clown's intuition. Without any doubts or hesitation, Klein took the initiative to reduce his subsequent strength. With a smacking sound he still threw himself forward, but it was much weaker than he expected. With a jarring noise, Lenivus twisted his upper body suddenly while his legs remained immobile. His face faced backward as his toes pointed forward. In such a terrifying scene, Lenivus threw a punch towards Klein's head. The force of the punch was so strong that even the air produced an explosive boom. Boom. His fist hit nothing but air, and his fist was still 20 or 30 centimeters from Klein's face. The winds that stirred from the punch blew through Klein's hair, but he didn't take the opportunity to attack the enemy. Instead he croaked a single word in ancient Hermes: crimson. A charm? Lenivus scrunched his face as he immediately jumped to the side in a bid to dodge the impending attack. However, Klein had yet to throw out the charm. Instead he clenched his left fist tightly and followed in the direction of Lenivus. He similarly threw himself to the side and rolled on the ground as well, causing the distance between them to only widen slightly. It was a bluff. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the highly raised corners of the clown's mouth were clearly reflected in his eyes. There was also a dark red flame which had unknowingly ignited in the clown's left fist. Lenivus's gaze immediately froze. A light crackling sound entered his ears and a calm, tranquil feeling emanated instantly, enveloping him and Klein. What is he trying to do? He wants both of us to be affected at the same time, to allow for the Nighthawks and military to rush here in time. Lenivus's eyelids drooped heavily, and the fatigue and weakness he had been suppressing began to rear their heads uncontrollably. He did his best not to fall asleep, hoping to rely on the uniqueness of his body to endure through the most intense period of the charm's slumbering effects. As for Klein, he didn't choose to resist at all and quickly entered a deep slumber. However, whenever he fell asleep unnaturally, he would instinctively wake up. This was the unique thing about him when fighting mediumship and dream invasions. This was the reason why he had been lucky enough to escape from the hands of Madame Sharon back in Tingen. In the fight just now, after throwing his cards proved ineffective, he immediately took out the slumber charm and gripped it tightly in his palm, waiting for the opportunity to affect himself and his enemy. In just a split second he forcibly broke free from the abnormal state of mind in his dream. The figure of the staggering Lenivus was clearly reflected in his eyes. Klein suddenly became very calm, as though what was before him was nothing but a target. He took a deep breath, turned his waist and pulled back his shoulder before thrusting his fist forward with all his strength. Bam! His fist landed ruthlessly at Lenivus's throat, breaking his bones and splattering his flesh. Lenivus took 2 steps back and leaned against the wall. That intense pain finally allowed him to extricate himself from the slumbering effects, but the fine iron-colored goosebumps on his body were all gone. After Klein's punch landed, he reached into his pocket with his left hand and pulled out 2 cards. So. The 2 cards each stabbed into an eye as scarlet liquid gushed out. Lenivus surprisingly endured the pain without letting out a tragic cry. Instead, he abruptly threw himself forward in a bid to make his last stand. Klein didn't take advantage of the situation to attack. Having long expected this, he turned his body to the side and took a step back. Right on the heels of that, while seizing the moment when Lenivus's fell forward, he took 2 steps and arrived behind him. He reached out with his arms and grabbed his enemy's neck. But Klein's arms exerted force and he suddenly turned around, twisting Lenivus's neck. After doing all of this, he took 2 steps back and looked at his enemy. With the card embedded in him, Lenivus looked ahead weakly as he slumped to the ground. At the same time, he was very confused and asked in a staccato manner, "What? Do you want to kill me?" With his clown mask on, Klein stared at his archenemy and replied indifferently, "No reason." "No." With his eyes wide open, Lenivus collapsed to the ground in the sewers, unable to accept his fate. Finally, his breathing came to a stop. At that moment, Klein, who seemed to be extremely calm, suddenly stepped forward, tightened his right leg and with all his strength kicked him in the head. Bam! His neck, which was already badly mutilated, could no longer bear the pressure and was sent flying like a rubber ball. It slammed heavily into the wall, creating a red and white patch. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly crouched down. Ha ha! Ha ha ha! He laughed crazily with a suppressed voice. The clown mask looked so very happy. The corners of those raised lips, the bright red nose, and that white face wore a very happy expression. Ha ha ha! Klein laughed so much that he went out of breath. His laughter was more jarring than crying. After a few seconds, he finally calmed down. He slowly straightened his body and winked with his left eye at the darkest part of the sewer. Then he smirked and muttered to himself, "Captain, look, we've saved Lone once again." Droplets of liquid quietly slid down and landed on his collar. At that moment, he felt that his clown potion had been digested completely. In the dark sewer, Klein wiped his neck and turned his attention back to Lenivus's cracked head and decapitated body before turning to the 2 tarot cards that were stuck in Lenivus's eyes. He originally wanted to retrieve all the projectiles that he had thrown and wipe the scene of any clues. However, he realized a very real and extremely serious problem. He didn't have the vision to see in complete darkness. He had relied on his spirit vision to rush through the pitch-black sewers and engage in the intense battle with Lenivus. He could see the colors of Lenivus's aura, the spirituality radiance of all sorts of critters, and could faintly use the light's illumination to distinguish the path. Unfortunately, the tarot cards he was currently using weren't the same as the ones that had originated from the Nighthawks. It didn't have any spirituality or silver engravings, and it was completely ordinary with no special characteristics. In such an environment, Klein could use his own aura's color and spirituality radiance to create a tiny radius around him where he could distinguish things. However, he couldn't see the cards stuck in the walls and ground, as well as the cards that had scattered everywhere. In the intense battle with Lenivus, they hadn't restricted themselves to a particular spot. Of course, he believed that as long as he had enough time, it wouldn't be difficult to find all the cards he had thrown out. But the main problem was that the Nighthawks and the military on board the airship would arrive at any minute. I can't be too careless regarding this. I've been wearing gloves all this time. This deck of tarot cards was bought before coming to Backland and is standard across the nation. I don't usually use it. Most of the time, even if I have it with me, it's placed together with Mr. Azek's copper whistle. Regardless of what methods are used, it would be very difficult to locate me through them. At most, they would be able to restore a portion of the battle scene. I donned a mask and my shoes are padded. All sorts of thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, and he quickly came to a decision. He turned to the headless corpse and crouched down. Reaching out with his black-gloved right hand, he quickly searched for any items left behind. Klein didn't have the intention of carrying out a mediumship ritual. Firstly, the feeling of the evil god's descent had left a deep impression on him, so he didn't dare to blindly channel Lenivus's spirit unless he brought it above the gray fog with him. Secondly, with the situation of the Nighthawks and military arriving at any time, he didn't feel that he had enough time to set up the ritual of summoning himself, responding to himself, and then going up above the gray fog and channeling the spirit. I should give up when it's necessary. Klein silently muttered to himself, and he withdrew his hand from Lenivas's body. This crazy swindler seemed to be in a hurry when escaping. He didn't bring any cash, materials or charms. He only had an eye-sized badge on him which coruscated a faint spirituality radiance. Klein wasn't afraid that this item could be used to locate him, as he planned on throwing it above the gray fog later to study it slowly. Therefore he stood up and put the badge in his pocket. He stole a glance at Lenivas's corpse, and without waiting for the Beyonder characteristic to appear, he used his left black-gloved hand to remove the remaining tarot cards. Then he stretched out his left arm and placed his palm directly above the Lenivas's corpse. All of a sudden, Klein released his grip, allowing the tarot cards to fall, like leaves cascading over the headless corpse. Some of them faced up with pictures and numbers printed on them, whilst others had dark red patterns on their backs. After doing all of this, Klein took out Azek's copper whistle and tossed it a few times. Then without looking back he ran deep into the sewers. After almost 2 minutes, figures finally arrived at this place. Some of them were wearing thick black windbreakers, while others were wearing well-tailored military uniforms. The leader of the group was S27, who was carrying a pure white bone sword. His red gloves were smeared with dust, and his determined face showed obvious signs of fatigue and frailty. They stopped a few meters away from the body, and through the means of their night vision, they could see Lenivas's corpse and his head against the wall. There were 2 tarot cards stuck in his head. One was the Emperor and the other was Wheel of Fortune. The headless body was covered with even more cards, each separately depicting the Chariot, the Hermit, Death, and more cards of different suits comprising of chalice, scepters, etc. On the walls and on the ground around him, there were also tarot cards such as the Devil, the Sun, and Judgment. It all looked like the scene of some bizarre ritual, and Lenivas was the sacrificial offering that was destined to be sacrificed. S27 drew a silent gasp as he knitted his brows tightly. The Beyonders around him fell into a momentary daze at the sight of this frightening and mysterious scene in the darkness. Far away from the scene of Lenivas's death, Klein quickly found an exit and left. He took off his clown mask and, in the shadows of the gas lamps, walked quickly towards East Borough. Before that he had already dealt with the stains on the soles of his shoes. It was only when he reached Black Palm Street in the East Borough did he breathe a slight sigh of relief. Then he quickly held the ritual of summoning himself inside his rented 1-bedroom apartment and responded to himself. In his spiritual body state, Klein moved all the clothes he had worn tonight, as well as the remaining charms, herbs and essential oils, as well as the badge he had obtained from Lenivas, to the space above the gray fog. Then he used a spiritual flame to burn the corresponding clues. Phew. He exhaled and finally had time to take a look at what the badge he had taken from Lenivas looked like. This badge was only the size of an eyeball. On the front was a symbol that depicted fate and concealment, and behind it was a ring of tiny and compact words in ancient Hermes. You can join if you have this item. What does it mean? Was Lenivas also a member of some secret organization? Klein rubbed his temples. In a situation where he was physically and mentally exhausted, along with the fact that the timing wasn't right, he decided to give up on his research and leave it till after the Tarot Club's gathering. He quickly left the mysterious space above the gray fog, changed into another set of clothes and removed his disguise. However, he was in no hurry to return to Minsk Street. He planned to sleep for the night before leaving. This was because it was easy to be inspected after midnight, especially when such an accident had just occurred. He lay down on the bed, looked out the window at the moonlight's encroaching of the darkness and gradually calmed down. After completing his initial revenge, he felt that he had relieved himself of a lot of his burdens and lost a lot of his pressure. His mental state was clearly much better than before. The present me isn't capable of handling ensanguined and sealed artifact 0-08. Besides, the gap between us is huge. Only after becoming a high-sequence Beyonder, a demigod, would I have the qualifications to involve myself in such matters. Before advancing to Sequence 4, I'll act as though they don't exist. Yeah, for the foreseeable future my goal is to work hard to improve myself. Now that I've completely digested the clown potion, I can advance to magician once the Beyonder ingredients are gathered. There's still Faceless, Nimble Right Master, and the corresponding sequence for which I don't know the name of. Other than that, I'll just be an ordinary detective. Klein's mind was calm and peaceful, and his thoughts were scattered as he thought about his future arrangements. He was no longer cranky or that depressed. As he thought about it, the corners of his lips curled up slightly as he silently muttered to himself. Captain Benson, Melissa, I believe all of you would prefer to see me like this. At dawn, a group of people wearing surgical hats and white masks came to the dock union's dormitory. They were all dressed as doctors. The elder in the lead appeared to be rich in experience as he said to the puzzled and confused residents, "We've discovered an infectious disease in this building. A person named Kevin has already passed away because of it. We will provide free treatment. This infectious disease has a special drug, and as long as you take it in time, you'll be fine." Kevin. One by one, the guests exclaimed in astonishment as they looked around for their colleague named Kevin. However, they didn't find him at all. That was Lenevis's alias. Seeing that the charity medical team was accompanied by police officers, the residents no longer had any doubts and began to line up nervously to collect their medicine. The first was a middle-aged man with a bushy beard. He nervously asked all sorts of questions, afraid that a single bottle of medicine wasn't potent enough to fight off the infectious disease. It wasn't until the doctors showed their impatience that he drank the blue bottle of medicine. Then he was helped to the side and aimed his mouth at a hole that was of the same size. The man suddenly felt nauseous as he violently vomited a putrid blob of a bloody substance. He was about to prop himself up and cast his gaze to see what he had just vomited when two strong nurses yanked him away. The mouth-sized hole was located above an iron-black metal barrel. The bottom of the barrel was dark and deep with almost no light coming from it. And right there, a pool of yellowish-green liquid was quietly resting at the bottom. In the middle of the pool was a small piece of blood-colored meat. One by one, the residents took the medicine and vomited in front of different metal barrels. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall. "Why did you suddenly visit so early?" Audrey looked at the sky outside, then she looked at Viscount Glaint. Glaint looked around and only found a golden retriever sitting beside him. "Hence," he whispered, "I was planning to go to the turf club, but I met Kance on the way. He told me something very interesting. It's truly interesting. Since I was passing by here, I thought of coming to share it with you." "What is it?" Audrey asked with interest. Glaint didn't deliberate over his words as he replied, "You should have heard of the Aurora Order, right? It was the Aurora Order that assassinated the Intis ambassador. They were caught with several important members killed, and a very large ploy was foiled as a result. I thought it was something related to the godhood of the true creator. Zio and Furs sent someone to report the information yesterday evening, and it just so happened that an operation was held last night. Wait, the Aurora Order apparently worships the true creator." Audrey's eyes lit up. She pressed in a reserved tone, "What ploy?" "I don't know," Kance refused to say. "He just told me that the person in charge of this ploy was once a wanted swindler, a swindler named Lenevis." Glaint spread out his right hand. As expected, Audrey nodded indiscernibly. She didn't conceal her curiosity and asked, "Was he caught?" "He's dead, but he wasn't killed by our people." Glaint paused for a moment. "This is what I meant by interesting. When his body was found, it was covered with many tarot cards. Same for the surroundings. You can imagine that scene." "Tarot cards? The body was covered with tarot cards?" Audrey was startled at first before it hit her. "This was done by our tarot club. It was Mr. Fool's adorer." Audrey, who thought she knew the truth, couldn't help but imagine the scene described by Viscount Glaint. Lenevis lying in the mud in the darkness, covered with rows and rows of tarot cards. There's the Fool, Justice, the Hanged Man, the Sun, the World, and the other major arcana cards and numerous numbered cards. They would either be overturned or facing right up, and there would be some left unturned, exposing only their backs as if they were all part of a large-scale eerie tarot divination. This kind of scene must be very shocking. I wonder where the card for justice landed. How would the Beyonders of MI9 and the Church view this matter? Would they believe that a new secret organization has appeared? By possessing the godhood of the true creator, the ploy between Lenevis and the Aurora Order must definitely be significant. It definitely would have brought a terrible disaster to Backlund and the kingdom. Yet this ploy was so easily foiled because of a simple mission Mr. Fool had issued. This is a tussle at the level of deities? Mr. Fool and the true creator are considered archenemies? It's no wonder he calls the other party the fallen creator. Many thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind as her body trembled faintly and imperceptibly. "What are you thinking about?" Viscount Glaint, who was sitting opposite, finally couldn't hold it in any further as he asked in puzzlement. Audrey abruptly snapped out of her reverie. Slightly cocking her head, she smiled and said, "Didn't you tell me to imagine the scene of the corpse being covered with tarot cards?" Haha. Glaint awkwardly smiled and sighed. "I wonder which secret organization's member killed Lenevis. It really matches how I imagine such things to be like. It's so cool. It's our tarot club." Audrey answered silently as she smiled. "Perhaps there's no organization, but the independent act of a powerful beyonder? Regardless, I like this style. Urge Zio and Furs and ask them when they can find my apothecary formula," Glaint said in excitement. Audrey widened her eyes slightly. Looking around her, she lowered her voice and said, "Hush, keep it down. How can you talk about potions here?" Glaint gave an indifferent smile. "Don't worry. It's nothing. I had already confirmed that other than you and me, there's only a dog." The huge golden retriever, Susie, unconsciously shifted her position. Northborough in Backland. Inside a room beneath the St. Samuel Cathedral. Daly, who was wearing a black hooded robe and makeup with blue eyeshadow and red blush, gave off a charming yet cold feeling. She randomly found a seat and picked up the document on the table. She swept through it before her gaze suddenly froze. Her brows immediately furrowed and she suppressed something as she asked, "Lenevis? Why wasn't I informed of this matter? Why didn't you inform me about the operation last night?" Sitting at the seat of honor, S27, who had hidden his chin and lips back into his propped-up collar, said deeply, "I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to control your emotions. That would have brought unnecessary danger to the operation, so I didn't get anyone to inform you. I can understand how you feel. A Nighthawk from the Tingen squad is currently undergoing guidance and training at the Holy Cathedral. He plans on joining the Red Gloves and his performance is about equal to yours. But as the person in charge of the operation and as a high-ranking deacon of the Nighthawks, I had to eliminate all unstable elements." Daly looked at the other Nighthawk squad captains and deacons and she sneered. "Why do you think I won't be able to control my own emotions? I'm very calm and I won't act rashly. My anger will only erupt after Lenevis is caught. This is the professional bearing of a veteran Nighthawk and a deacon. If I had caught Lenevis, I would let him know that men can be weak too. I would make sure that a cold, rotten yet stiff corpse would be situated behind his buttocks. I would make sure that a pungent white bone filled with thorns would be situated in front of him. I'd make it so that those cold little fellows enter and leave his body wherever they can." "Damn it. You actually managed to let him die just like that." S27 looked at Daly calmly and sighed after silently listening to her until she was done. "How long have you been putting up with it?" Daly froze, then muttered in frustration like a deflated ball, "For a very long time." Sesamir retracted his gaze and cast them towards the other deacons and captains. "Got anything? From our preliminary investigations, the person who killed Lenevis is a member of the Secret Order, a Sequence 8 of the potion name, Clown. He's adept at using paper cards as flying knives." A deacon reported based on the findings. "However, we are unable to confirm this guess. The tarot cards scattered across the corpse don't seem like they were concealing something. After all, the Beyonder didn't deal with the cards on the wall and in Lenevis's head. We all believe the final scene was more of a ritual or a symbolism. Therefore, we suspect that the Beyonder might belong to an organization we don't understand. Of course, the scene might also just be a personal preference of his." Sesamir nodded slightly and said, "We can start from that point and proceed with a follow-up investigation. Any updates on the person who tipped us off?" The charming middle-aged man, Harson, flipped the papers in his hand and said, "We investigated the person and discovered that his actions were directed by a bounty hunter. In the process of looking for the wanted criminal Lenevis, the Balam's companion was killed by a member of the Aurora Order. In order to exact revenge, she secretly carried out an investigation and eventually locked onto the target at the Workers' Alliance Tavern in East Balam Dock. Based on the target's actions and lifestyle, she discovered Lenevis. Her actions have basically been verified by witnesses. There isn't anything strange about it. We also used Beyonder means to confirm that she has no connection with the person who killed Lenevis. She's in hiding now and it's very hard to find her." Casimir added while seemingly in thought. This fits very well with Lenevis's description, that the radical and insane members of the Aurora Order were helping him out. Is there any problem with the reporter who did the interview at the Union that afternoon? Another captain of the Nighthawks reported. He was a fake reporter, and according to news from the police department, he's actually a private detective who had previously helped Mike Joseph of the Daily Observer. Joseph was investigating the murder of Sibber. We suspect that he got some kind of lead, found the dock union and disguised himself to get in touch with everyone who was suspected of being the killer. This guess has already been confirmed by Isengard Stanton. Casimir acknowledged it before switching to ask about other people who had recently come into contact with Lenevis, but similarly got answers that there was nothing wrong with them. Towards the end, he said after some deliberation, "I'm very confused by the lack of motive for the murder of Lenevis. That mysterious murderer deserves our attention. You should continue to follow up on this matter. In addition, according to common sense, the Aurora Order definitely wouldn't only have Beyonders at the Rose Bishop and Shadow ascetic level in a big city like Backlund. There should at least be an oracle or perhaps even a saint. Their ploy of receiving the true Creator's descent has failed. With their crazy and irrational traits, I'm worried that they'll launch a series of retaliatory acts. All of you are to be on high alert in the near future. I'll also be staying in Backlund." "Yes, Your Grace," the deacons and captains replied solemnly. Crestet Casimir paused for a few seconds before adding, "The events of the Megos incident in Tingen and last night's incident with Lenevis have revealed a problem. The industrial area, the dock area, and East Borough have become hotbeds for the descent and nurturing of evil gods. You are to send people to investigate and gather the truth about the situation. If it truly is as Lenevis had described, I'll raise this matter at the Council of Cardinals, formally exerting pressure on the kingdom and the government to bring about the corresponding changes as soon as possible." Klein slept in and didn't wake up until it was late. However, it still wasn't bright enough outside. The area was still shrouded in fog, making it dark and cold. "This doesn't fit with my splendid mood," he grumbled. After changing his clothes and taking his key, he returned to Minsk Street unnoticed. After changing from his worker's uniform to casual home attire, a shirt and sweater, and after confirming that no one came investigating his identity as a private detective, he was completely at ease. He leisurely went out to the butcher and grocery store to buy food in preparation for a sumptuous lunch for himself. There was some afternoon sun in Backlund, and Klein lazily basked in its warmth, momentarily having no desire to do anything. He waited until 15 minutes to 3, then he took out his golden pocket watch for a glance before returning to the bedroom and going above the gray fog. After conjuring the fake world and familiarizing himself with its controls, he sat down on the high back chair at one end of the table and gave a message to the sun that he was to prepare for his participation in the gathering. At precisely 3 according to Backlund time, streaks of crimson light soared out of the vast and ancient palace, outlining blurry figures which were equally indistinct. Audrey directly looked towards the seat of honor and said cheerfully, "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. The simple mission you entrusted has been completed." She had deliberately emphasized the word simple, in order to ascertain from Mr. Fool whether Lenevis had really been eliminated by his adorer. She wanted to know if the tarot card-covered death scene was a symbol of the tarot club. Klein deliberately acted composed as he said with a smile, "I'm already aware." After saying that, he sighed. In such an age, in such a place like Backlund, in such a place in the East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district, they're the hotbeds for an evil god's descent. What? Alger was stunned for a moment, wondering if there was something wrong with his ears. Why would a simple mission involve hotbeds for an evil god's descent? I remember that the simple mission given by Mr. Fool was for the sole purpose of examining 2 people for their candidacy of joining the gathering. The general idea was to find the person in the portrait, and that person was confirmed to be in Backlund. Alger Wilson tried to remember what had happened the last gathering, and he couldn't understand what it had to do with the hotbed of an evil god's descent. Wasn't it just the search for someone? Furthermore, it was the kind of task which didn't pose much of a threat. Was there a deeper purpose behind Mr. Fool's simple mission? Was this a silent contest between deities? Many thoughts went through the hanged man's mind instantly, and he almost couldn't stop himself from asking justice, tempted to pay in order to understand what exactly was going on. However, as a veteran official beyonder, A seafarer who steered an ancient ghost ship, he was experienced and shrewd. He forcefully suppressed his impulse and planned to go through the internal channels of the Church of the Lord of Storms to find out about the recent events in Backland. As for Audrey, she instantly understood what Mr. Fool's sigh meant. She immediately understood the entire situation regarding Lenivus. So it turns out that the bit of godhood that Lenivus possessed was the basic foundation for the descent of the true creator into the real world. The harsh situation in East Borough, the dock area and the factory area, however, was a hotbed that provided him rapid nurturing and strengthening. With a simple mission, Mr. Fool stopped the true creator's great conspiracy and saved the whole of Backland. Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table, her eyes sparkling brightly. Unconsciously, she brimmed with admiration. At this moment, the gloomy and reserved world let out a chuckle and said, "Yes, every time I see and hear about a large number of child laborers dying in their teens, and how most workers rarely live past 30 due to extreme exhaustion and the terrible environment, or how after barely surviving the previous tests and as a result of their old age and the loss of their jobs, they can only wander the streets and die of hunger and cold, I have no doubt about the existence of an evil god. These gods are on the ground in East Borough, the dock area and the factory area. Well, there's even been a report that some factory workers have a hard time surviving 5 years. In the East Borough of Backland, there's a saying that among the people who live there, without exception, any person who's a grandfather must be from the countryside. The meaning of this sentence is that people living there won't have a third generation as they can't have grandchildren. Poverty and hunger make their children very thin. Work that's difficult to adapt to causes them to quickly wither away in Backland, much less getting married and conceiving the next generation. This was the first time Audrey heard Mr. World speak so much. She was suddenly plunged into deep shock and confusion. Why don't I know anything about this? The newspapers and magazines I read only mention that the residents of East Borough are having a hard time. This is far worse than being laborious. Audrey's eyes lost their focus for a moment. She felt as if her understanding of the kingdom and the world had been completely overturned. Suddenly she understood why Mr. Fool had uttered such a sigh, and why in such an age such a Backland in such an East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district were the hotbeds of an evil god's descent. We can't go on like this. Otherwise, Backland will one day be destroyed because of this. Audrey felt a strong urge to go back and learn more, to remind her father, Count Hull. She wanted to use the powers of a spectator and a telepathist to secretly guide the governmental policies that would improve the lives of the pitiful people in East Borough, the docks area and the factory district. At the end of the long bronze table, Klein quietly observed Miss Justice's reaction. He had purposely lamented a while ago and used his smooth, the world, to give a detailed explanation. He wanted this noble, one who still had a semblance of purity, to realize the seriousness of the problem and use her to push for change in the kingdom. Before I become faceless, I must clearly remember that I cannot be personally involved in such matters. He silently set such a boundary for himself. Thank you, Mr. Fool. Thank you for saving Backland. Your sigh has made me understand the problem at its roots. Thank you, Mr. World. You have made me understand a great deal of the situation I didn't know in the past. Audrey held back her emotions and sincerely thanked the two gentlemen at the two ends of the table. Saved Backland. Alger was no stranger to the conditions of East Borough, the factory district and the dock area. He was more surprised by the description Miss Justice had used. Just how huge was this matter? He thought with an extremely puzzled frown. The son, on the other hand, listened quite attentively, and although he couldn't understand all of it, he still listened attentively, hoping to learn more about the regions where Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice and Mr. World were located. Klein only smiled in response to Miss Justice's gratitude and didn't do anything further. He then turned to look at the Hanged Man. Alger immediately understood what he meant, and he quickly conjured the last page of the promised Roselle's diary. Klein received it out of thin air and took a casual glance at it. January 14th. I discovered a problem. If unconscious high-sequence beyonder objects are not sealed, they would unconsciously attract nearby low-sequence beyonders from the same pathway, causing them to come into contact with each other. The higher the original sequence, the more likely that this will happen. However, this situation doesn't seem to be a constant. It seems to be intermittent. This diary entry immediately jolted Klein to attention because he had made similar guesses before. After he came to Backland, he soon found himself intertwined with the secret order, with a Beyonder of the Seer pathway, and thus found himself in an extremely passive and extremely dangerous situation. However, he had also obtained the corresponding sequences 7, 6, and 5 potion formulas as a result. At the time, he had suspected that his transmigration involved secrets that gave him the power to resurrect, and that he would occasionally attract people and objects related to the Seer pathway, such as the Antigonus family's notebook or members of the secret order. After seeing this diary entry of Emperor Roselle, Klein suddenly had a new idea. He used the corner of his eyes to scan the thick gray fog and the illusory dark red stars below him. He muttered to himself in silence. Could it be that the one who created that attractive force wasn't me, but this gray fog, the mysterious space above the gray fog? This could also be considered as a secret behind my transmigration. Without any further clues or information, Klein quickly gathered his thoughts and read the second diary entry. January 16th. The taste of a demoness still isn't bad. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched, unsure of what expression he should show. Emperor, I have underestimated you. There's really nothing stopping you. Don't you care about the other person's previous gender? Don't you care about her experience during the pleasure phase? Suppressing the urge to exhale, Klein looked at the last entry in the diary in his hands. January 20th. I finished making the second card of blasphemy. Let me think, where should I hide it? Yes, I plan to disguise it as a bookmark and insert it into a very valuable book. If the person who obtains it isn't someone fated, it would be hard to imagine that the most valuable thing in the book is actually that seemingly ordinary bookmark. Not bad, that's a good idea. Emperor, why can't you explain more clearly? Which book did the bookmark go into? Before I read this, I was so happy thinking that I can follow the clues and obtain a card of blasphemy containing the profound secrets of the deities. Klein was disappointed and let his gaze linger on the last paragraph. I hope that there will be more specific information in the future entries of the Emperor's diary. He comforted himself with this sentence, leaned back and said with a smile, "You can start your discussion freely now." At that moment, the son Derek raised his hand, having learned it from Miss Justice, and said, "Mr. World, the Beyonder weapon you gave me far exceeds my expectations. I've already accumulated enough contribution points to trade for the ingredients to advance to sequence 8. I'll use the remaining contribution points to hire helpers to obtain a chance to obtain the true root and juice of the Miss Treant. I'll be able to complete the deal soon." He explained in great detail, worried that his reputation of keeping his word would be suspected and destroyed. Of course, he was telling the truth. Although the axe didn't match some of his expectations for a Beyonder weapon, its power shocked him. That axe can create a powerful lightning bolt in just 2 or 3 strikes, and with the temporary boost from my bard's powers, I can easily fight in close quarters with a sequence 7 monster. If I were to encounter a monster that's afraid of lightning, I could even easily finish it. I'm now a light suppliant with a certain level of magical spells. My strength has been raised qualitatively and I can fight against even more powerful monsters. Derek Berg felt that he had fallen in love with that Beyonder weapon. In the City of Silver, its potency was one of the reasons to like it. The surrounding darkness and monsters in the depths of the darkness forced them to obey this rule for generations. All right. The gloomy world nodded under Klein's control. He then looked around and asked again, "Lady sirs, do you have any clues regarding the dark-patterned Black Panther spinal fluid or spring of the elves' marrow crystals?" Audrey shook her head without hesitation. After musing for a few seconds, Alger suddenly said, "There will be a grand event held on the Sonia Sea soon. Ships from the 4 pirate kings and the 6 pirate admirals will be participating. I should call them the 7 pirate admirals. Another person has joined the ranks. There'll definitely be transactions of Beyonder ingredients at such an event. It's very likely that the not very rare dark-patterned Black Panther spinal fluid or spring of the elves' marrow crystals will appear. I have the opportunity to participate in this event, but what can you offer in exchange? I'm sure you don't have the potion formula for Wind Blessed and that it'll be very difficult for you to find it in the future too. High probability of appearing." Klein controlled the world and made him laugh deeply. "Yes, I really don't have the potion formula for Wind Blessed, nor will I have the means to obtain it anytime soon. However, I have an incomplete formula for a sequence 4 potion. Even though it's incomplete, I think you should know its value very well. It can be exchanged for at least 10,000 gold pounds, and most of the time, you can't even buy it with money worth several times that. This is a crucial step that will lead to a human's qualitative change. So, are you interested? The spinal fluid of a dark patterned black panther is worth between 500 and 700 pounds, and the spring of the elf's marrow crystals is between 300 and 400 pounds. I believe you'll still need to prepare an additional 9,000 pounds in cash or an item of equal value. Klein had long since speculated that the sequence of the Sun sequence pathway, unshadowed, could be swapped with the same sequence of the Sailor and Reader pathways, and this conjecture had been indirectly confirmed by Mr. A's request and in the information provided in Roselle's diary. It was even suspected to extend to the secret suppliant and spectator sequence pathways. Therefore, he believed that the incomplete formula of unshadowed was an irresistible temptation for the hanged man who was from the Sailor pathway. It doesn't matter if you don't have something worth 9,000 pounds for the time being, you can pay it in installments with Mr. Fool bearing witness. Klein silently added. Currently he was lacking the spinal fluid of a dark patterned black panther, so he didn't mind letting the hanged man remain on credit. In any case, he didn't need to worry about the possibility of him running away. While there are also latent risks. I would be at a huge disadvantage if Mr. Hanged Man suddenly dies. With such an expensive deal at hand, Klein couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive. The incomplete formula of a sequence 4 potion? An incomplete formula that leads to the path of a demigod? This is something that you can't even buy with money. Audrey's eyes lit up. She couldn't help hiding her curiosity as she asked before the hanged man could speak. Mr. World, can I ask which sequence 4 pathway the formula pertains to? If it's not convenient to tell me, pretend I never asked. Mr. World actually has a sequence 4 potion formula. Even if it's incomplete, it's still very shocking. No wonder Mr. Fool pulled him into the tarot club. He isn't a simple beyonder. Well, Zio's and Furz's test mission has come to an end. Mr. Fool didn't mention if he's letting them join. Well, he must have other considerations and maybe he needs more time to observe them. I shouldn't take the initiative to ask since it will appear impolite. Many thoughts ran through Audrey's mind at that moment. Miss Justice's question was just what Klein wanted. He made the world reply in a husky voice. I was planning to say it anyway. It's the potion formula to sequence 4 of the Sun pathway, unshadowed. The Sun pathway? Derek instantly looked towards Mr. World, who sat at other end of the long bronze table, his eyes filled with sudden eagerness and longing. However, he maintained his silence because he knew that he was still far from the threshold of a demigod. He had to spend his limited resources to strengthen himself first. Only caring about the near future was the way the City of Silver operated. This was because, to its residents, there might not be any future at any moment. Unshadowed. Audrey nodded gracefully, then happily said, "Thank you for your answer, Mr. World." She felt like she had learned something important again. Unshadowed. Alger muttered slowly before calmly replying, "I'm sorry. I have no need for it." No need for it. Klein was taken aback. This was completely different from the script he had imagined. In his shock, he indirectly caused the world to pause, looking incredulous. It took quite a few seconds before he said, "You can first owe a portion. With Mr. Fool as witness, I believe you'll definitely make up for the rest." "No, I really have no need for it." Alger shook his head. "No need for it. He really has no need for it. He's confident that he would gain the favor of the Church of the Lord of Storms and be bestowed with the corresponding potion directly? Or does he actually have the sequence 4 potion formula to the Sailor pathway?" The name was Cataclysmic Inter? Klein quickly thought of 2 possibilities. What should I do? Don't tell me that I should trade the witch or demoness of pleasure formulas with him. Klein silently mocked himself, deliberately making the world silent for a few seconds before saying, "Other potion formulas or some secrets I know. Such as, secrets of the peak-level sequences." Alger changed his seating posture a little as he deliberated before answering, "I personally know some secrets of peak-level sequences. How will you guarantee that there's no overlap? How will you guarantee that the secrets you will tell me is equal in value to the dark-patterned Black Panther spinal fluid and spring of the elf's marrow crystals? We'll each give the peak-level sequence secret to Mr. Fool and let him decide if there's any overlap and determine their values. Mr. Fool, is that all right?" Klein manipulated the world and asked himself this question. Then he said with a supercilious attitude, "Sure. Alger slowly nodded. I have no problems with that. Let's begin. I really want to know the secret of the peak level sequences, but I haven't had any extra money lately to buy it. Audrey looked enviously at the world and the hanged man as they each conjured a piece of goatskin parchment. Having never worried about money since she was young, she finally experienced the taste of poverty. Very soon Klein received the content written by the two members. Without a doubt, he first looked at the goatskin parchment from the hanged man and discovered that the content was simple. There was only one sentence. The peak level sequence conceals the path to divinity. Phew. Great. Otherwise, there would be a need to use other information for the exchange. Klein carefully examined the world's goatskin parchment before chuckling softly. It doesn't overlap. To most Beyonders, the secrets Mr. World is providing is of no value, but in the eyes of others, it's extremely important. This cannot be measured with money. Hearing this conclusion, Alger immediately fell into a dilemma. To him, getting two Beyonder ingredients at the same time wasn't a small burden. He had to sell many valuable items in order to trade for them. To pay such a price to hear a secret that might not be very useful to him? Alger considered it for nearly 20 seconds before saying, Mr. Fool, can you provide more hints? I can't make a decision yet. Can't make a decision? The corner of Klein's mouth moved slightly. He knew that the words he had said to maintain his image had the opposite effect and had been ineffective. He hesitated for a moment and then smiled. The content he describes is a detailed supplement to the secret you know. Detailed supplement? A detailed supplement to the path to divinity? Alger didn't hesitate any longer. He turned his head to look at the world and said in a terse and firm voice, Deal. Then he immediately added, I'll help you exchange for the spinal fluid of a dark-patterned black panther and the spring of the elves' marrow crystals within the week. Of course, the premise is that they'll appear at the pirates' meet. Although the probability is very high, we still have to believe that anything could happen. If that happens, I might have to postpone it to next week, the following week, or even the next month. But don't worry, I will keep my promise. No problem. With Mr. Fool as witness, there's no need for me to worry, the world answered hoarsely. After they had confirmed the transaction, Klein conjured a goatskin parchment in front of the hanged man. Alger lowered his head eagerly, reading through each word voraciously. There is a sequence 0 above sequence 1. And sequence 0 is the sequence of a true god. They can similarly be reached through the corresponding potions and rituals. Sequence 0. The sequence of the true god. Alger was astonished and shocked at first, but soon he felt relieved, and then he murmured to himself in delight, I see. I understand what it means. He inhaled silently and leaned back in his chair as if nothing had happened. That secret must be astonishing. Mr. Hanged Man even lost his composure. Audrey looked away with a longing expression and said to the son who was diagonally opposite her, Mr. Sun, I remember you mentioning that the City of Silver has the Dragon Pathways Sequence 9, 8, and 7 potion formulas? Yes. Derek nodded honestly. Sequence 7's potion formula is Psyche Analyst. If I wish to get it, what is the price I need to pay? Audrey asked in a reserved manner. The Sequence 7 potion formula of the Sun Pathway, Derek replied without any hesitation. Audrey nodded gently and said, I'll do my best to obtain it. Zio and Furs mentioned before that there's a Beyonder of the Sun Pathway at Mr. A's gathering. He's at least sequence 7 and is adept at purification and exorcism. Once all the recent events settle down, I can attempt to get it from him. In addition, I should join more of the gatherings at the abandoned education building in that hospital. I should try to come into contact with members of the psychology alchemists. One of the two paths will definitely lead to something. Thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind, but she suddenly realized that she was unable to obtain it even if she discovered clues to the formula. This was because she would be experiencing a financial crisis for the next few months and was barely holding on. The price of a Sequence 7 formula is around £800, so if I scrimp I should be able to produce that. It's already October, it's almost New Year's. I'll be an adult then and I'll have the freedom to handle a lot more of my money. Or should I use the knowledge I was taught by Mr. Fool to trade? I wonder what attitude he has towards this kind of behavior. Audrey's thoughts gradually dispersed. She decided to wait until there was hope for the formula before she asked Mr. Fool. The transaction segment came to an end. Klein originally wanted to use the knowledge he knew to exchange for a mystical item without many negative effects, but after sensing how tight the Hanged Man was, he knew that the other party would pay a large price for those two Beyonder ingredients. It was unlikely that he had any extra assets, so he could only give up in regret. As soon as the free exchange segment began, Alger took the initiative to mention, Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos's ship and crew was subdued, giving rise to a new pirate admiral. Audrey was interested in the pirate admiral and asked, "What's his name? What was his current title?" "There hasn't been any related news in Backlund." Alger nodded slowly. "She's a lady and was a famous pirate in the past. You should have heard of Ailment Girl Tracy, right?" "No, I don't know much about such things." Audrey shook her head in honesty. Sitting at the end of the table, Klein added inwardly. Alger fell silent for 2 seconds and without wasting any time explaining he said, "In short, she subdued the crew of Kalangos's crew last month. She proved herself with actual action that she had the strength of a pirate admiral. She changed the name of Kalangos's ship to Black Death and calls herself Rear Admiral Ailment. In the past she acted independently and was someone who specialized in curses, black flames and ice. Her enemies would always suffer from sudden ailments of various kinds. At present no one knows which pathway she belongs to, but they're certain that she's at sequence 5. Audrey listened with relish. She blinked her eyes and requested curiously, "Mr. Hanged Man, can you introduce the 4 pirate kings and the other 6 pirate admirals in detail? I've only heard of their names and titles, but I don't know what Beyonder powers they are equipped with." Alger looked around and saw that both the sun and the world were showing signs of attentiveness. He nodded slightly and said, "That wouldn't be an issue. The strongest pirate king is the King of the 5 Seas, Nast. He claims to be a descendant of the 4th epic Solomon Empire. Not only is he a high-sequence Beyonder, but he possesses the terrifying ghost ship, Dark Emperor, a relic of the Empire. He's adept at using order. He can pull his enemy into combat in a domain that he's best at and create fascinating effects. He's also the oldest pirate in the world. Rumor has it that he's over 100 years old and he has been active in the 5 Seas since the Roselle era. No one knows exactly how old he is. Of course, compared to the other pirate kings, there's a lot of information about him. As for the owner of Dawn, all we know is that she's a beautiful woman. She was once a warlock and is now a demigod. She calls herself Queen Mystery." After introducing the 4 kings, Alger changed the topic to the 6 remaining pirate admirals. The owner of the Black Tulip, Ludwell, was once a subordinate of the King of the 5 Seas. Later he became independent and calls himself Admiral Hell. Rumor has it that he's established certain connections with the Numinous Episcopate. He's a powerful medium and can control all sorts of creatures in the spirit world. He's terrifying and odd. Rumor has it that he possesses a ring left behind from the ancient era's death. Admiral of Stars Catlia was once a follower of Queen Mystery, but they've long become estranged. The reason for that, according to rumors, is because she joined a particular secret organization, angering Queen Mystery. And according to the information I know, this secret organization is the Moses Ascetic Order. The Moses Ascetic Order. The Mystery Prior Pathway. The Hidden Sage. Klein suddenly thought of old Neil's loss of control and the evil god who would whisper temptations into the ears of low-sequence Beyonders of the same sequence. This was the first time he learned news regarding the Moses Ascetic Order through reality instead of books. Then Alger introduced Admiral of Blood Seigneur, who was suspected to be non-human, Rear Admiral Deep Sea Howl Constantine, who possessed a bloodline that was partially from sea monsters, Rear Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards, and Rear Admiral Dusk Bulatov Yoan. "Thank you so much for sharing. I'm beginning to yearn for the sea," Audrey said, filled with longing. "I don't know when I'll be able to truly travel." "No, Miss Justice, it's absolutely not as nice as you imagine. From my point of view, it's an amalgamation of blood, chaos, murder, desire and horror." Alger calmly doused her enthusiasm. Audrey nodded and switched topics. "There have been 11 serial murders in Backlund recently, but one of them has been proven to be a copycat crime. The serial killings are against women who were street girls but are now working normal professions. The murderer cuts open their stomachs and removes all of their internal organs. This sounds like something to do with devil worship. Was it done by someone from the Blood Sanctify sect?" Alger instantly made a guess. I don't know. The murderer hasn't been found yet. Audrey yearned to become a detective, bringing Susie along and capturing that cursed murderer. At this moment Derek blurted out in a daze, I know about such rituals. He knows. That's right. Before the cataclysm, especially during the second epoch, devils were active in the real world where they lived on the ground. They were the object of hatred for both giants and dragons. It's normal for the City of Silver to have relevant records. Their history hasn't been tampered with, nor has there been any blanks over the generations. Klein looked thoughtfully at the son, waiting for him to say more. You know about this? Audrey asked in joy. Derek nodded. It's mentioned in our devil studies. It's rather ancient. The devils use it as a ritual to supplement their advancement, typically used when advancing from sequence 6 to sequence 5. It's not a ceremony to please the devil, but a ceremony for the devil to assist them in advancing? Audrey asked in surprise. Derek replied very seriously, that's right. The Abyss Pathway's sequence 6 is called Devil. This is also the origin of that race's name. The Abyss Pathway? Before the cataclysm, the Devil Pathway was called the Abyss Pathway, and Devil is only the name of sequence 6. Could sequence 0 be Abyss? Again Klein discovered the value of the sun. A lot of knowledge and mysteries were lost across the river of history, but the City of Silver still possessed them. Is that so? Audrey nodded indiscernibly. Mr. Sun, are you aware of the actual details of the ritual? Derek nodded and said, the minimum requirement is 13 and the highest is 49. The more complete the ritual, the higher the chance of advancement. Between two murders there must be a minimum of 3 days. Otherwise it would be easy to lose control, but the interval will also not exceed 9 days. That will cause the ritual to be reset. Every time a murder occurs and after every partial ritual, the devil will eat the victim's organs. From this point on he'll be in a violent and bloodthirsty state, wishing to harm others until that desire is satisfied once again. That's really scary. Audrey sighed from the bottom of her heart, feeling that she couldn't even bear to imagine it. Klein sat in the thick gray fog, quietly listening and remembering. After discussing the case of the serial killer, Audrey looked at Alger and organized her words. Mr. Hanged Man, there's something that I've been wondering about. I've attended several Beyonder gatherings and find that very few people sell potion formulas. Even if there is one, it would be very difficult for the transaction to close. Why is this? Alger chuckled and said, that's because a potion formula is easy to fake, and Beyonder gatherings are relatively hidden and not too binding. Therefore no one dares to risk their lives. Are you going to prepare 2 sets of Beyonder ingredients and conduct an experiment with animals first? That price is too high. Audrey suddenly felt a little guilty. Moreover, that's not the only extra cost. Animals can lose control more easily than humans after taking potions. You have to hire a few Beyonders to protect you to prevent you from dying during your experiments. So for most Beyonders, even if a formula appears, they wouldn't dare buy it, Alger added. Audrey felt even guiltier. Alger didn't notice her reaction and continued. Because of this, unless the host or a member of the gathering has the ability to appraise the authenticity of the potion formula and has already won the trust of most members, it's difficult for a formula trade to close. While the old Mr. I of Wisdom can. Mr. A is a shepherd, so he should be able to. Klein leaned back in his chair and muttered something to himself in silence. A thought flashed through Audrey's mind as she asked, can't it be done by making an oath? Honorable lady, this is an underground gathering. Do you think it's suitable to make an oath in the name of one of the 7 orthodox gods? This isn't something that can be resolved with an oath. A corresponding ritual is needed. Alger chuckled. As for other evil gods or devils and mysterious existences like the hidden sage and the true creator, unless you're their believers, who would dare to swear an oath in their name? Wouldn't they be wishing death upon themselves? At this point he sighed. In addition, without them knowing the acting method, potions easily lead to a loss of control, easily turning people into monsters. Furthermore, the corresponding ingredients are hard to obtain and rather expensive. Therefore, as long as the 7 churches don't allow such trades to be officially recognized, there's no need for them to deliberately control the spread of potion formulas on a wide scale, much less talk about advancement. So that's how it is, Audrey murmured to herself, clearing a huge question in her mind. No wonder. Klein suddenly came to a realization. 7 orthodox gods. Derek really wanted to ask which 7 they were, but he ultimately held himself back. He thought for a moment and said, "The City of Silver has recently organized an expedition to explore deep into the darkness and found a semi-destroyed temple. The statue that's worshipped inside was a naked man nailed upside down on a cross. There were also a lot of bloodstains on its surface. Do you know which god that is? This is the true creator. The forsaken land of the gods actually has a temple of the true creator. Judging from what the sun said, the true creator shouldn't exist before the cataclysm. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the City of Silver to not recognize it." Klein used his clown ability to control his expression to prevent the shock from showing on his face. Justice, the Hanged Man, and the world exchanged looks, shook their heads and said in unison, "We don't know." Just as they finished speaking, they heard Mr. Fool in the gray fog say in a deep voice, "That's the fallen creator." The fallen creator? Derek frowned immediately. The residents of the City of Silver had always believed in the omnipotent and omniscient God, the Lord that created everything. Therefore, when he heard a similar name with the word fallen tagged to it, he couldn't help but instinctively reject and feel uncomfortable about the notion. Fallen creator. That's the way Mr. Fool addresses the true creator. So that's the image of this evil god. But why would his statue and temple appear within the City of Silver's exploration confines? That place is suspected to be the forsaken land of the gods. Or perhaps before it was abandoned by the gods, there was already the faith of the true creator. Could the holy residence that the Aurora Order always talks about be the forsaken land of the gods? Many thoughts came to Alger, but he couldn't make an accurate judgment because the history before the cataclysm had long evolved into myths and legends. It couldn't simply be described as information shrouded in fog. He thought for 2 seconds and deliberately said, "We have another name for the fallen creator. It's the true creator. The faction that believes in him is in control of the beyonder pathways such as the secret suppliant, listener, and shadow ascetic. The subsequent sequence includes the shepherd you mentioned before." Shepherd? The silent Derek sat up straight, his eyes filled with horror. He wasn't unfamiliar with the beyonder pathways which the Hanged Man had referred to, other than some of the sequences being described with similar words in the City of Silver. For instance, the whispered and listener. So that strange and evil statue represents the secret suppliant pathway. Elder Lovia is already a shepherd. She's been acting more and more strangely. Derek suddenly started to worry about the 6-member council's newly advanced elder and the safety of the City of Silver. In the past, when they explored the surrounding areas, the City of Silver had found a few cities that were completely destroyed. In those places, only a few pieces of rubble had been carved with words that proved the existence of such a civilization. These words were all variations of Dragonese, Jotun, and Elvish, and most of them repetitively described one kind of existence. That existence was called Evil God. The residents of the City of Silver who was involved in the expedition were guessing that those cities were destroyed by evil gods. So after finding out that Elder Lovia's pathway was probably controlled by an evil god, how could Derek not be shocked, worried, and terrified? He returned to his taciturn state, disappointing Audrey, who had been waiting to hear more stories about the City of Silver. After so many gatherings, after her purchase of the dragon race's intelligence, her interest towards the City of Silver had grown even more. His reaction is a little different from what I expected. Alger observed calmly for a while, but he failed to gain anything from it. For a moment he couldn't find a point of entry into the conversation. And if he asked directly, he suspected that the son would request payment, which wasn't an easy task for him since he was burdened with the debt of 2 beyonder ingredients. It was at this moment that they simultaneously heard the sound of the table being tapped gently. Klein concealed his fatigue with the thick gray fog and said with a chuckle, "Let's end today's gathering here. Your will is our will." Audrey immediately stood up and curtsied with her illusory skirt. The Hanged Man, the sun, and the world successively replied with similar words. Klein waved his hand and severed the connection, quietly watching the blurry shadows of Miss Justice and the others disappear into thin air. Then he made his smurf the world disappear. Then he picked up the small badge which he had obtained from Lenevis and studied it. "You can join if you have this item." Klein read the sentence on the back of the badge but realized that it didn't undergo any changes. He thought for a moment and carefully injected spirituality into it. A layer of faint light bloomed and quickly condensed into a light beam, shooting out of the gray fog. However, it was repelled by the endless gray fog. The beam of light suddenly dispersed, transforming into a palm-sized piece of illusory goatskin parchment. On it was written in ancient Fasak, January 4, 1350, 8 p.m. in Bobber Valley. A simple communication device in the field of mysticism. It sends out messages, requests synchronization, and gets the latest rendezvous time and venue. Klein recalled the scene he had just seen and made a preliminary judgment on the use of the badge. 1350, that's next year. The Bobber Valley lies in the area before the Tussock River enters Backland. The time is precise, but the venue is vague. It's a valley that's almost 100 kilometers long. Perhaps this badge can be used as a location tool when one gets there. Klein turned the badge over and over with interest, trying to figure out the corresponding symbols, incantations, and characteristics, to see if he could copy one himself. Unfortunately, since he was no longer part of the Nighthawks, his knowledge in mysticism was still at the same level as before. He had no opportunities of improving it further. Therefore, after studying it for a few minutes, he could only helplessly give up. As for the phrase, "You can join if you have this item," Klein's plan was to not consider it for the time being. If I can become a faceless by the end of this year, then I can head there in disguise. Otherwise, forget it, Klein silently said to himself. Then he turned his attention to the matter of advancing to magician. The true root and juice of the miscreant is likely in the bag with the sun. If my luck isn't too bad, I should be able to get the spinal fluid of a dark patterned black panther this week. Sequence 7, a mid-sequence. I can already see and touch it. How should a magician act? As he thought about it, Klein began to consider specific issues. Due to his experiences before and after his death and resurrection, he instantly comprehended the true essence of clown. Therefore, in this month or so, he only needed constant acting in his daily life to gradually digest it. He didn't need to make further summaries and adjust it according to the feedback. After killing Lenivus and attaining his initial revenge, the clown potion was completely digested the moment he was laughing amid tears. This wasn't the same as the process in which Klein first digested the seer potion. It was considered a special case, and now he had to return to such a situation with the magician's acting. The true essence of magician, to pass off the illusory with the genuine? According to what Zeratul said in the Emperor's Diary, although the main focus of this pathway isn't fate, a portion of it still belongs to it. So, there must be something corresponding to it. For example, it might seem that fate can be changed to a certain extent, but in the end it turns out to all be an illusion. It's just a magic trick that fools you. Klein rubbed his temples, then wrapped his remnant spirituality around himself and descended into the gray fog. St. George's Borough, in a 2-bedroom apartment. Fortunately, I prepared another place like this. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know where to hide. Furs stared into the mirror and removed her dropping hair. That's right, Sayo replied weakly, lying in bed. I just read in the newspaper that Lenivus is dead, but this matter involves godhood, so it won't end so soon. We have to hide for a while. No, it's you who's going to hide, not me. I'm an upright clinical doctor, the author of a bestseller. Furs looked at herself in the mirror and began putting on simple makeup. Sayo couldn't provide a rebuttal as she slowly sat up and said, "Thankfully I was sufficiently clever and possess rich experience. When I got someone to make the report, I didn't directly say that it involved the godhood of the true creator. I only described it as seemingly very dangerous and that the target had experienced huge changes, like he was praying to evil gods. If not, I wouldn't even dare to stay in Backland. To be embroiled in high-level battles sure is troublesome and dangerous. I don't want to take on any more of Miss Audrey's missions again." "Really?" Furs asked without looking back. Sayo fell silent for a few seconds and said, "Actually, there was no need for us to mention the godhood. Since Miss Audrey was able to discover this on her side, the Church of the Goddess would definitely be capable of doing so. They've most likely killed Giant, right?" "I can't be sure," Furs replied without mincing her words. Sayo froze, then let out a long, slow sigh. Furs stopped what she was doing, turned her head to look at her and said, "This mission was basically completed by you, so I won't be sharing the payment with you. There's a total of £200, so with the £70 you've saved up, even if you deduct the expenses, you should be close to obtaining the first Beyonder ingredient for the sheriff potion. But I wouldn't be able to receive the £100 from the police so quickly." Sayo pursed her lips. This wasn't to say that the police wasn't willing to give the bounty money, but that she couldn't take it directly. She had to go through the friend who had helped her deliver the clues. That was the official bounty recipient. Since she believed that this matter would definitely cause a huge ruckus, she didn't have the guts to find her friend anytime soon. As for whether that friend would usurp the bounty, she was quite confident. The other party had helped too many shady bounty hunters before. It was fine to take a commission, but if he dared to directly usurp all of the bounty money, he would have already died in some unknown dark alley. But it will ultimately belong to you. Furs paused for 2 seconds and seriously asked, "When you've collected enough money, will you contact the masked guy and work for him so that you can purchase the corresponding ingredients from him?" "No, unless I can't get it anywhere else and that there's no hope." Zio gave her answer. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall. Audrey was still reminiscing over today's gathering when she suddenly saw her personal maid, Annie, coming over with a piece of paper. "Miss, here's your telegram." Annie smiled and said, "It's from the east coast of Balam." "Alfred's?" Audrey happily received it and read it carefully. "Dear sister, the rainbow salamander that you asked for has arrived at Pritz Harbor last night. My orders are to deliver it to your manor in the suburbs." "Arrived last night? Then it'll be delivered to my manor as early as today and by the latest tomorrow." Audrey tilted her head to the side and looked at Susie, who was fighting with her snacks. With a shallow smile, she said, "Susie, the gift I prepared for you is almost here." "Woof." Susie looked at her mistress in confusion. "Ring, ring." Klein circled the lawn behind Leopard's house a few times on the bicycle the inventor had just completed. "It's not bad, it's just as I expected, but there's no need to make a lone standing bell. The cyclist won't be able to free a hand when they encounter a situation. You can combine the bell to the handle. This will make it simpler and more adequate for situational developments." Klein's right hand clasped the brake tight, slowing the bike down to a stop. Meanwhile, he placed the bell in his left hand back to its original spot. Leopard thought for a moment. "Yes, that's right. I was simply imitating the ringing bells of the carriages and forgot that this is a brand new mode of transportation." At this point he looked at Klein, who was getting off the bike with great familiarity as he placed it on a rack. "You give me the feeling that you've ridden a similar type of transportation tool before and you rode it very well. I'm sure all the other bikes on the market are very flawed and very different from my bike. Sir, do you have time to learn more about bicycle sharing systems? As a clown, I should actually be able to ride a unicycle." Klein silently lampooned before smiling. "This has nothing to do with experience. The key is outstanding balance and exercise." He quickly changed the subject. "But based on your introduction just now, the production cost is quite high, and it's quite at odds with our product's market segment. You have to come up with a plan as soon as possible to reduce the cost, and you have to understand that nobles, magnates, and other people of the high classes of society will definitely not choose to ride their own bicycles. It would be disgraceful, and the same goes for the middle class with an annual income of £300 or higher. Our target audience are clerks, postmen, so-called working-class aristocrats, and people who earn between £70 to £300 a year. This is just a prototype, a term invented by Emperor Roselle. It's normal to have a high cost. If the subsequent industrialization is successful, I believe it wouldn't be a problem to lower it to £6. If we can find a cheap replacement material for natural rubber, it'll be even better. That's the most expensive component." Leopard had long considered this problem as he replied. "Unfortunately, no crude oil has been found in this world yet. I wonder if it actually exists or not. Can refined coal tar be a replacement in this aspect? I don't know about this at all. I'm neither a student of this profession nor a savant." Klein thought for a moment and said, "If the cost can be kept below £4, we'll be rich. As for the cheap material used to replace natural rubber, you can go through Roselle's manuscript. Maybe he has some ideas." "Yeah," Leopard said before he suddenly added, "Speaking of which, I just remembered that there will be an Emperor Roselle Memorial Exhibition at the Royal Museum next week. It's organized by the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. Rumor has it that there will be the original blueprints of Emperor Roselle's inventions and all kinds of relics." "The original invention blueprints and all kinds of relics?" Klein's heart skipped a beat and pressed, "When is it exactly? I'm very interested." "From next Tuesday to next Friday, every day from 9 in the morning to 6 in the afternoon. Although Emperor Roselle was once the enemy of the kingdom, The allure of his legendary life hasn't declined because of this. I'll take some time out of my schedule to visit the exhibition. Klein fished out his bulging wallet and took out two £10 and two £5 notes. Here's the second payment. Use it to study how to cut costs and make the most perfect application at the patent office. If you don't have a lawyer you know, I can introduce one, and the last £20 will be given to you next week to find new investors and complete the industrialization of the product. Of course, I'll also help you get in touch with people who are interested. He had never thought of monopolizing the profits of a bicycle. First, he lacked the money for mass production, and second, he believed that he lacked the social connections needed for industrialization, promotion, and sales. He could barely do it himself or hire people to do it. It was hard work with no guarantee of success. It was even possible that he might make a loss. In that case, it would be better to bring in new investors with relevant resources and channels and let the professionals handle the professional work. More importantly, he would then have the opportunity to cash out a certain amount of shares in advance, accumulating the resources and cash that he needed to advance to Faceless. He wanted to avoid running into a situation where he encountered the ingredients but lacked the money to buy them. Besides, I have no intention to be a bicycle tycoon. My identity is sensitive. I should stay away from things that might draw society's attention towards me before I become a Faceless. I'm acting as a magician, not a businessman or a factory owner. Klein sighed in his heart. I know several lawyers, Leopard muttered, and received the second round of investment funds. Why don't you go to the bank and apply for a loan? When we get the patent, I'm sure that a bank will loan us money like the Backland Bank or Varvat Bank. We're not just bringing in investors but resourceful channels, connections, and skills. Do you understand? Klein explained with a smile. He then put on his hat and said, when you've applied for a patent, send me a letter. You know my address. On the Sonia Sea stood an island with an extinct volcano. One by one, ships with masts and sails approached the shore, crowding up the reasonably sizable wharf. The sound of the pirates singing, shouting, laughing, cursing, and cheering filled the air, turning the place into a sea of revelry. The hanged man, Alger Wilson, stepped off the Blue Avenger and climbed a cliff not far away and watched all of this in silence. With the exception of the 4 kings and the 7 pirate admirals, the rest of the pirates only received the news of the event a week ago. Most of them won't be able to arrive in time, as this will prevent the navies of the different countries and the powerful beyonders from the various churches to launch an assault. Alger watched the pirates carrying out buckets of ale without his attention on them. He knew that the Lone Kingdom already had a new generation of ironclad warships, but he wasn't worried about meeting one here. This was because only 4 months had passed, and the advertised invincible fleet still needed more ironclad warships, and different types of ships for support, as well as the time to train military officers, sailors, and gunners. There was no way they could create a combat force without a year's time. Even as Alger's thoughts drifted away, the pirates on the ships and wharf suddenly cried out in alarm. Some ran deep into the islands, some hurriedly steered their ships away from the wharf, as if they were running from devils and the plague. In just a few minutes, the bustling scene from before was reduced to a desolate mess and silence. Alger turned his head to look at the sea and saw a ship painted black with a huge white flag with a skull hanging from its mast. The skull was pitch black, and its eye sockets burned with a ghostly blue flame. Black Death. Alger whispered. He understood why the pirates had scurried off. Wherever Rear Admiral Ailment Tracy passed, she would leave a wake of people who got sick for no reason. Black Death approached the shore slowly as a figure wearing a white linen shirt and dark red coat appeared at the ship's bow. The figure was quite a beautiful lady, and she also exuded a heroic vibe. Her beautiful black hair was coiled up high, and she had a white scarf wrapped around her head. She wore beige pants and had a tall and slender figure, and it had no lack of elegance. What attracted the most attention was the woman's long, straight eyebrows and the sharp, bright blue eyes. As she looked around, her eyes would occasionally lose focus, making her look adrift and exceptionally alluring. A wandering poet who had mixed himself with the pirates had arrived at the edge of the cliff at some point. He began reciting. She will always be a girl. She indeed brings ailments. My mind is full of her. A number of pirates who left, gathered once again as they looked at ailment maiden Tracy, mesmerized. Alger held back his feelings of contempt as he glanced at the pirates and scoffed inwardly. Truly a bunch of fellows with no future or will. All they knew was hide moments ago, but now they've become seduced by her beauty. Although Ailment Maiden is indeed very beautiful, it's not to the extent that it will cause them to act this way. Oh, a beyonder power related to allurement? As his mind was whirling, Rear Admiral Ailment Tracy left Black Death and began walking to the Black Palace deep within the island. At that moment, a huge sailboat appeared on the sea. Its flag depicted an eyelashless eye with 10 stars surrounding it. Admiral of Stars Catlia. Alger nodded gently and muttered silently. Since the Black Death and the other ships were already docked at the wharf, the huge ship didn't approach the shore. Instead it went around to the sheltered cliff and anchored. Soon after, the gloomy sky suddenly lit up, and bits of stellar radiance sprinkled down, condensing in the air to form a transparent long bridge. It led from the giant sailboat to the palace. A woman stepped onto the long bridge and began strolling through the air. She wore a black classical robe with numerous symbols and magic characteristics inscribed on it. The most obvious one was a mysterious eye with no eyelashes. Hanging on this woman's waist, there was a celestial globe and a short scepter. She resembled powerful warlocks who were active in the fourth epoch according to folklore. Alger looked up and frowned slightly as he muttered in puzzlement, "That celestial globe looks familiar. It's like the strange glass bottle I previously obtained, the one I had no idea how to use. It eventually shattered after Mr. Fool pulled me into the gathering." On the outskirts of Empress Borough, Audrey led her maids and the huge golden retriever Susie into her own manor. "Miss, the delivery from Enmat Harbor is just ahead," the butler in charge of the manor said in a respectful tone. "All right." Audrey nodded lightly and said half-jokingly to the large golden retriever beside her, "Susie, this is your present." As they spoke, they turned a corner and saw the so-called gift. It was a giant lizard whose skin changed color depending on how the light hit it. It was 3 meters long, and its height reached Audrey's knees even with it laying on the ground. They were 2 colossal creatures, enormous enough to frighten a child. Woof. She turned her head to look at her mistress and saw that her expression was exactly the same as hers. Apparently, she hadn't expected the gift to be so exaggerated. Audrey had always had a subconscious understanding that a rainbow salamander equals the rainbow salamander's pituitary gland equals the size of one's palm. To her, it would be something soft with grooves, a beyonder ingredient which constantly changed in color. So, what did that have to do with the 3-meter-long colossus in front of her? For a moment she was confused, but when she heard Susie's yelp, she snapped to her senses. She pretended to be satisfied with the result and said to the butler, "This is exactly the animal specimen I need. It's just a little bigger than I thought, just a little. Take the servants and move them to the warehouse. I'll study it when I'm free." "Yes, miss." Then the butler immediately instructed the nearby male servants who were furtively looking at their mistress. Audrey looked around and, without another word, led Susie into the manor's study. Using the excuse that she had to focus on writing a return letter to her brother, she made all the maids she had brought stay outside. After the dissection is done, there will be 2 sets of rainbow salamander pituitary glands. A portion can be used to exchange for a Farsman rabbit, just enough to concoct a bottle of the telepathist potion. Audrey gradually recovered from her astonishment and confusion as she began to think about Susie's advancement. At that moment she thought of a serious problem. She had no idea if Susie had digested the potion or not. If it hasn't been completely digested, consuming the telepathist potion would easily lead to a loss of control. She isn't like a human who can endure through it. Wait, how did she endure it the first time? Besides, her current intelligence is about that of a 10-year-old child's. As she's already learning words in the loan language, and she said she wishes to read newspapers and magazines as well as books. Audrey fell silent for a few seconds. She glanced at the confused large golden retriever that sat beside her. "Susie, have you completely digested the potion?" "Digest?" Susie returned with clear articulation, expressing her puzzlement. Audrey had already told her that what she had taken was a potion, and she had warned her not to tell anyone, and not to tell any intelligent animals that could bark or meow. Audrey nodded her head slowly and heavily. "It's a very strange and unique feeling. Feels like something illusory inside your body breaks down and fuses with your mind. You will vaguely see illusory stars one after another, and you will be one of them. These stars will attract each other in a bid to fuse as one." Susie quietly listened to everything, then replied with a light and brisk voice, "Then I should have completely digested it. I've had a similar feeling before." Susie has completely digested the spectator potion? But no one taught her the acting method. At most, I would occasionally remind her to observe more and remain calm. Audrey asked in astonishment, "When did you digest it?" "Last month, the month before last, or perhaps even earlier." Susie tried her best to recall when. Seeing that her mistress's expression was getting odder and odder, she hurriedly wagged her tail and timidly added, "I don't remember. I'm just a dog. I won't purposely remember such things." "Woof. Just a dog. But you were only a little slower at digesting than me. Don't tell me that when I interact with other Beyonders I'll say that when it comes to digesting potions, I'm a little better than a dog." "Pooey. Audrey, what are you thinking?" Audrey maintained her elegant smile and politely praised, "Very good, I mean on this matter regarding the digestion of the potion, you did very well." Returning from Leopard's Place, Klein took a leisurely afternoon nap. But it wasn't long before he was awakened by illusory, disconcerting cries. "Well, is it Mr. Hanged Man or Little Son? Is one of the final main ingredients for my potion ready?" Klein carefully tried distinguishing who for a few seconds and soon forgot about his anger from being awakened. He quickly got up, took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. He noticed that the crimson star that symbolized the Hanged Man was contracting and expanding. Hence he stretched out his hand, spreading his spirituality before touching it. After the usual honorary names of the Fool, the Hanged Man prayed. "I've already gathered the dark-patterned Black Panther spinal fluid and the spring of the Elf's marrow crystals. Please permit me to hold a sacrificial ritual and seek your help in handing it to Mr. World." That's pretty fast. The Hanged Man had said that there would be a grand event among the pirates soon. It seems like it's not soon, but now? He always holds back when speaking, never fully speaking the truth. Klein nodded indiscernibly and said, "Sure." After a simple sacrificial ritual, Alger resisted his urge to ask Mr. Fool if the celestial globe on Admiral of Stars Catlia had anything to do with him. At this moment, Klein had already forgotten about him and was admiring the 2 Beyonder ingredients on the surface of the long bronze table. The dark-patterned Black Panther spinal fluid was a seemingly translucent liquid, but if one looked carefully, they would discover that its clarity was also divided into different levels. The lower one went, the more transparent they were at distinct levels. It fully satisfied someone with an obsessive-compulsive disorder. The spring of the elf's marrow crystals was similar to a faded egg. Its shell was very thin and it looked like it could easily shatter at a touch. Even without shaking, one could still hear the sound of swishing water inside. "I should be able to get 300 pounds and a formula clue. My magician is only short of the true root and juice of the mist treant. I wonder when Little Sun will complete the mission." Klein waited in anticipation. As for the other supplementary ingredients, he had already bought them at various stores. For example, the droplet gem he needed to buy was purchased from a jewelry store and he had ground it into powder. 5 grams was about 2.5 pounds. The son Derek didn't keep Klein waiting long, and on Wednesday evening he whispered a prayer to the Fool that he had prepared the true root and juice of the mist treant and asked him to pass them on to the world. The mist treant's true root was heart-shaped, brown, palm-sized and wrinkled. It looked like an old man's skin, but its back was as smooth and exquisite as a gem. It was slightly expanding and contracting as though it had a certain amount of vitality. Its juice was light green and sparkling, making it look very delicious. Klein just looked at them, feeling a little smug. In the present day and age, Sequence 7 was the threshold of a mid-sequence Beyonder. This meant that a Beyonder would finally be able to bid farewell to the state of being only slightly stronger than ordinary people in certain aspects. They would be able to wield a relative abundance of Beyonder powers. Phew. Klein slowly exhaled, returned to his bedroom and summoned himself to bring the Beyonder ingredients into the real world. He didn't prepare any additional vessels. He washed an iron pot in the kitchen a few times and began to concoct the potion according to the steps of handling the supplementary ingredients before handling the main ingredients. With the clown's ability at controlling his body, he quickly finished the first stage and one by one he put in the dark-patterned Black Panther's spinal fluid and the mist treant's true root. Sizzle. With a jarring sound, a pale white fog suddenly rose and was forcefully pulled back into the pot by an invisible force. When everything calmed down, Klein quickly poured every drop of liquid into a transparent bottle that he had prepared. That liquid was rather special. It was as if fireworks were constantly being released from within it. Red, orange, yellow, green, and other colors constantly scattered, disappeared, and then reappeared again. This was the magician potion. Klein stuck a coin worth £1 between his thumb and index finger of his left hand, flicked it up, and opened his palm to catch it. He was using divination to confirm if the potion he concocted had succeeded. But the gold coin fell, its portrait faced up, indicating a positive response. Without any hesitation, Klein put away the gold coin, picked up the potion, and walked out of the kitchen. At that moment, the sky was already dark. The gas lamps in the room hadn't been lit up yet, causing the surroundings to be in complete darkness. Only the light near the oriel window created a gloomy scene. Klein sat down on the sofa and began cogitation to calm his stirring heart and dispel all of his emotions temporarily from his body. After doing all of this, he raised the glass bottle, tipped his head, and drank the magician potion. Gulp, gulp. The ice-cold potion went down his throat, and at every moment, it felt like countless bubbles were bursting. Klein's entire body was experiencing this stimulation, and massive amounts of information flooded his mind, blooming into fireworks. The veins on his forehead bulged, and his head felt like it was about to burst. However, this wasn't a very difficult situation for Klein to endure. The terrifying ravings before entering the gray fog and the evil roars of the true creator were much more terrifying. Hornasis, Phlegria. Hornasis, Phlegria. Hornasis, Phlegria. The ethereal temptation echoed again. Klein's head expanded and contracted repeatedly before he gradually recovered his thoughts. He began to consciously restrain his thoughts, outline the spherical light, and slowly enter a state of cogitation. After an unknown period of time, his vision recovered. At the same time, he felt an itch all over his body, with his arms feeling the worst. Klein rolled up his sleeves and was surprised to see that one of his arms was deeply wrinkled, like a centenarian. The other arm had lost its color and had become translucent. He could directly see his blood vessels, muscles, and veins. Could it be that I had nearly lost control? Oh, it shouldn't be. This should be the remnant influences. Klein sat on the sofa in the dark, leaning forward as he watched the anomaly in his arms warily, as if it were a breeding ground for monsters. And all of this had nothing to do with Klein. He sat quietly on the sofa in the darkness, watching his creased skin and the translucent state of his arms slowly recover. 5 to 6 minutes later, Klein silently sighed as everything finally returned to normal. It's a good thing that no one came knocking on the door or ringing on the bell. I only chose to advance after completely digesting the Sequence 8 potion. With such severe effects, it would be hard for those Beyonders who depended on time to grind through the potion. It really is difficult to pass this stage. No wonder Captain took 9 years. No wonder Swain, the former captain of a mandated Punisher squad and owner of the Evil Dragon Bar, didn't dare to consume the Sequence 7 potion, Seafarer. After sitting silently for more than 10 seconds, Klein slowly stood up. At that moment he was already a mid-sequence Beyonder. At that moment he was already a magician. He took 2 steps forward and passed the coffee table. Klein stretched his body and shook his wrist, but he found nothing unusual. He looked at the gas lamps outside the oriel window which illuminated the darkness and gloominess and said to himself thoughtfully, "My hands are more agile and I'm more nimble. Even if I don't have Beyonder powers, as long as I work hard enough, I can become a top magician." This was his first impression of his own transformation. And just like what was recorded in the Nighthawk records, if a potion provided a specific magical power, then the Beyonder would become aware of it after ingesting it. They would grasp the specific details as though the corresponding knowledge would be injected and imprinted into the mind through a mysterious method. Just now my head nearly exploded. Klein smiled and shook his head, carefully recalling what he had felt and the corresponding magical spells. It had to be said that magician was indeed considered a powerful Sequence 7, with it possessing many miraculous abilities that could all be cast very quickly. Among them there were 3 which Klein valued and liked the most. The most important one was damage transfer. As long as he didn't die instantly, as long as his hands could still move, he could transfer the vital wounds to unimportant areas like his arms, turning fatal wounds into minor injuries. This was a very useful Beyonder ability for life preservation in actual combat. The only problem is that at Sequence 7, wounds can only be transferred around my body, and there's only one opportunity. Perhaps as my sequence is raised, the wounds can be transferred to other items or people. It really does feel like magic. Klein imagined the future. The second spell was Flaming Jump. Within a range of 30 meters he could phase between a fire spark that he had left behind and the original flame. It was similar to teleportation, which seemed to have a uniqueness of gaining help from the spirit world. Well, it can be used to its fullest when performing magic. Klein mocked himself inwardly with great satisfaction. More importantly, as he digested the potion and raised his sequence, the range of Flaming Jump would increase significantly. The third type of Beyonder spell was the air bullets, which Klein had seen the suited clown from the Secret Order use. The magician could produce air projectiles with power and speed comparable to that of the bullets fired from a custom revolver just by snapping his fingers or mimicking sounds. Furthermore, the effect would improve along with the digestion of the potion and the raising of his sequence. Klein suspected that at sequence 4 or 5, he could create his own cannonball. This way I don't need to buy more revolvers and bullets anymore. No, I still need to buy one. There are many matters that don't need me to expose my Beyonder powers. Any problem that can be solved with guns isn't a problem. Klein nodded indiscernibly and began to examine the other spells and spell-like abilities. The fourth type was paper figurine substitutes. At a critical moment, the magician could temporarily change the paper figurine into him while he swapped places. It was a relatively simple substitute spell that could not only block a fatal blow but also weaken the damage from hexes. So this is the use of all the paper figurines that Nimblewright Master Rosago had brought with him. He must feel regret because he was contaminated by the true creator and didn't have the chance to use a substitute at all. The biggest problem with this spell is the need to prepare the materials beforehand, which means that the paper figurines have to be cut in advance. In the early days of the 5th epoch, Beyonders who brought similar items would undoubtedly be regarded as a dark warlock. If it's discovered now, I'll most likely be suspected. Klein mulled over the uses and limitations of paper figurine substitutes. The 5th kind of spell-like ability was called flame controlling. As the name implied, one could manipulate flames within a range of 30 meters with a simple action. It could also be used to ignite certain items within this range. Once the potion has been completely digested or when I advance in sequence, one could summon a swirling flame out of thin air. The 6th was illusion creation. By influencing the surrounding environment, one could create illusions with colors, sounds, and smells that were close to reality, allowing one to pass off the fake as the truth and deceive the enemy. This is a specialty of a magician. Klein chuckled and walked over to the oriel window as he took in the night scene of the streets with great satisfaction. The 7th was a fake form of underwater breathing. The principle behind it was to create a thin, invisible air pipe which would allow the magician to breathe freely and seemingly turn into so-called murlocs. The problem was that the air pipe had a limited length. At his present stage, Klein could only maintain it at around 5 meters, which meant that if the water depth exceeded 5 meters he could drown. Of course, the potion's digestion and sequence advancement would result in the growth of the air pipe. The 8th was a spell-like ability, bone softening. This helped a magician break free from handcuffs, ropes and chests. It's also a specialty. Klein thought in a good mood. The 9th was the evolution of the clown's ability to turn paper into throwing knives, called drawing paper as weapons. Not only could it turn paper into sharp objects, but it could also temporarily turn into weapons such as bats or bricks, etc. These were the 9 main spells or spell-like abilities of a magician. Although they weren't particularly strong in both the offensive and defensive aspect, nor were they particularly bizarre, they stood out for their variety. They allowed Klein's strength to instantly rise by more than one level, and his life preservation and means of escape became even better. Moreover, magicians had the ability to cast spells at high speeds. This was a sequence of Beyonders who didn't need to chant or inject spirituality. With just a simple action they could cast a corresponding spell or spell-like ability. In addition, the potion made Klein attain some tiny tricks, but they weren't very practical. I can barely be considered quite a good Beyonder. Klein sighed silently. Just as he was about to go out for a stroll and get another revolver and replenish his bullets at the Braveheart's bar, the gas lamps outside the oriel window which tainted the crimson moon's moonlight suddenly turned darker and deeper. Klein looked up in surprise and saw that the dark clouds and mist had dispersed, clearly revealing the red moon, which was a little more than a semicircle. Its outline rapidly turned into a full circle, and in just a few seconds, It had turned into a full moon that was as red as blood. It had only been 2 weeks since the last full moon. According to the normal calendar, according to astronomy, there were still about 10 days left until the next full moon. This is the blood moon? Klein's lips moved slightly as he muttered to himself in relief. In this world, the changes to the room were both regular and irregular. Ordinarily, it was exactly the same experience Klein had in his previous life. However, there were always a few times every year when it would suddenly become round and dark red, just like blood. Such a situation that had no logic to it. At times it happened only once a year and sometimes 4 or 5 times a year. Neither astronomers nor mystics could explain this phenomenon or come up with a pattern. Therefore they could only ignore it for the time being as one of the puzzles. They joked that perhaps the goddess was in a bad mood and that a change in a woman's mood was undoubtedly irregular. Of course, not knowing the reason and not being able to understand the essence of the phenomenon didn't mean that there was no corresponding conclusion. In mysticism, people called this situation the blood moon, believing that it would bring about the rise and eruption of negative emotions, and that it would strengthen the power of the underworld and the spirit world. Even if the dead were summoned, they might still be able to climb out of their graves. This is the second time this year, right? Klein stood by the oriel window, admiring the clear sky, and the disc-like full moon which was red and glistening. He felt he was in a relatively good shape. In an apartment in Sherwood Borough, Furswall, who had participated in a gathering that night, was unable to make it back home to the 2-bedroom apartment in St. George Borough. She sat cross-legged on a sofa in the living room, chewing on a new type of bread which had meat and vegetables in it. She had let down her hair as she thought over the plot of her next novel. Suddenly she frowned and threw away the food and pen in her hand. The moonlight outside the window grew stronger and redder, and the look on Furs's face became more and more painful. Every full moon she would hear those ravings that would drive her mad. Bam! She fell off the couch, her body writhing as she struggled. After a while she pulled out a clump of her hair, but the pain did nothing to ease the explosive sensation in her head or to calm the urge to end her life with a knife. "Here it comes again," Furs muttered in pain as her legs were stretched taut from the spasms of pain. She chanted the name of the god she believed in with great difficulty, seeking redemption. "Great God of steam and machinery. You are essential, the embodiment of. You are an artisan, a protector. You are the glory of technology, glory." As she repeatedly chanted, Furs's suffering didn't abate and instead it grew more intense. Bam! She tumbled around violently, toppling the coffee table and sweeping the books on it to the ground. Unable to endure it any further, Furs frantically used her nails to scratch the wooden leg of the coffee table, creating one deep scratch after another along with jarring screeching sounds. But her fingernails broke. Her hair was growing abnormally long. At that moment she felt that she would lose control that very night and become a monster. She had already chanted the honorable names of several gods, but she had failed to receive any reprieve. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die." As she writhed and rolled about, she suddenly saw a piece of paper with the words in ancient Hermes written on it. It was the mysterious incantation Zio had found in the history of the Lone Kingdom's aristocracy. Her chanting of it had even attracted an existence suspected to be an evil spirit. "Even if it's an evil spirit, as long as you can help me, I'm willing to accept." Such a thought flashed through Furs's turbid mind. She struggled to look over as she used all her strength to whisper, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Save me, save me." Klein had just put on his double-breasted frock coat, picked up his half-top hat, and was walking toward the door when he heard a series of illusory prayers. "Who is it?" He frowned slightly and listened, but he could only confirm that the supplicant was a woman and that her voice was staccato as though she were in great pain. Since he had nothing particularly urgent to tend to, the newly advanced magician Klein casually tossed his half-top hat onto the coat rack accurately, and he returned to his bedroom. After taking 4 steps counterclockwise, he entered the majestic palace. This time he didn't see any illusory star expanding or contracting with a deep red glow. Instead, at the end of the ancient mottled bronze table, by the side of the fool's seat was a clear radiance rippling out. "It's a prayer from a non-tarot club member. Is it Zio or that lady with curly brown hair?" Klein speculated as he took his seat. Since he had already emptied his anonymous account, he didn't suspect that someone was trying to steal his wealth. Leaning back, Klein pointed with his left hand, spreading out his spirituality to touch the rippling light. The scene around him suddenly changed. He saw the overturned coffee table, the slanted sofa, books and papers strewn all over the floor, and a woman with brown hair struggling in pain. At the same time, Klein heard her prayers. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Save me, save me. Save me. From the looks of it, she seems to be losing control. Her hair is growing longer at a discernible speed, and her skin is covered with a layer of sinister white light. How could I possibly save her? Klein observed carefully for a few seconds, then mumbled to himself, feeling stumped. It was at this moment that he detected in the woman's anguished pleas a faint, illusory, indistinct raving. Yes, a raving. These ravings were similar to the ones he experienced before rising above the gray fog, but it had no madness or evil to it at all. Furthermore, it didn't contain any obvious malice. It appears that this lady's state of nearly losing control is a result of hearing the ravings. If she stops hearing it, could she be able to calm down and turn for the better? In thought, Klein reached his hand out to the rippling circle of light. Following that, he allowed his spirituality to gush out of his body, establishing a firm and mysterious connection. After advancing to magician, his spirituality had become a lot more abundant, and the burden in this aspect had decreased accordingly. Furs felt her head muddling as she felt her thoughts were like boiling water. They were constantly bubbling in a bid to break free of the restraints of her head. Am I dying? I don't want to become a monster. Just as she was woefully thinking this in her mind, the pain flooded over her like a tidal wave. Suddenly she was wide awake. The pain, the irritation, the madness and the despair which she felt so deeply in her bones, seemed to no longer exist, as though it was only an illusion. I managed to endure through it so quickly today. Isn't it longer during a blood moon? Confused, Furs opened her eyes which she had unconsciously closed. She found an endless grayish-white fog beneath her, and in front of her was an ancient, mottled bronze table. Where is this place? Surprised, she looked around and saw numerous towering stone pillars, as well as a towering palace that was propped up by those stone pillars. Then, at the very end of the long bronze table, she saw a mysterious figure shrouded in thick gray fog who seemed to be overlooking everything from above. What is this place? Who is he? Furs turned wary and questioned inwardly. Then she remembered what she had just done. Under her extreme pain, she had chanted the mysterious incantation which Sayo had found in the history of the Lone Kingdom's aristocracy, an incantation that was suspected to be directed at some evil god. No, not just evil spirits. He was actually able to temporarily help me get rid of the harmful effects of those terrifying ravings. He even pulled me into this strange world. While Furs suppressed the fear in her heart, she half stood up and bowed. May I know who you are? At that moment she suddenly recalled the contents of the incantation as she blurted out, You are the fool. Mr. Fool. You are His Excellency, the Fool? Klein smiled, nodded slightly and said, Just call me Mr. Fool. As he spoke, he noticed on the back of the chair in which Furs was sitting on, the symbols and mysterious patterns formed by the shining stars were rapidly changing. In just 1 or 2 seconds, the interior of the room was covered with layers upon layers of doors. Numerous illusory doors of the same kind were formed there. Door. As soon as Klein saw the symbol, he immediately associated it with the mention of Mr. Door in Roselle's diary. During a full moon, the other party would come close to the real world and let out cries for help. Could the ravings have something to do with Mr. Door? It's the night of the blood moon tonight, an enhanced version of the full moon. This lady corresponds to a door, and the symbol on the back of Miss Sayo's seat is similar to the Sword of Judgment. Klein nodded indiscernibly. Through this, he confirmed that once a stable connection was established and that if the other party was a beyonder, the symbol behind the seat would change according to the other party's actual circumstances. They didn't have to necessarily join the tarot club and come to the mysterious space above the gray fog at fixed intervals. At that moment, waves of shock rose up in Furs's heart. The Fool. It's indeed the Fool. That honorable name does point towards a powerful existence. What does he want? Will he want to make a transaction with my soul? It's at least better than losing control from those ravings. I guess I managed to claw my life back. Whatever happens in the future would just be a bonus. While she was still lost in her thoughts, she suddenly heard Mr. Fool ask with a smile, "You hear ravings from nowhere every full moon? How does he know?" Furs looked over in surprise and replied in a daze, "Yes." Before she finished her sentence, she suddenly thought of a possibility and asked, "Do you know the origin of those ravings? Do you know who is trying to harm me? Do you know how to solve this problem once and for all?" "He's a miserable wretch who is lost in the darkness and trapped in a storm." Klein had intended to reply with the words that would shape his image, but when he thought about it, he couldn't be sure that the woman in front of him had indeed heard the words coming from Mr. Dorr. In order to not make any mistakes and to not embarrass himself in the future, he skipped over the question and said with a vague smile, "He might not necessarily want to hurt you. Perhaps he is just asking for your help. Therefore the ravings weren't malicious, not crazy or evil. Asking for my help. But those ravings push me closer and closer to losing control. If you hadn't helped me, I might have become a monster by now," Furs returned incredulously. Klein grinned and said, "That's because you're too weak." "I'm too weak." Furs was stunned and at a loss. Klein briefly explained, "The difference in your life's natural order and his is too great. Perhaps just by breathing normally, the storm brought about by him can rip you to pieces. Perhaps just a glance from him will cause you to die on the spot. Of course, if he purposely controls his own strength, it's not that he can't communicate normally with you. However, his voice might need to pass through layers of obstructions in order to reach your ears. Deliberate control typically implies a failure to call for help." Haha, that's if we assume that he's calling for help. "The difference in our life's natural order is too great. I would die from just one glance from him." Furs was stunned from what she heard. After quite some time she forced a smile and said, "This reminds me of a saying. You may not look directly at God." Klein smiled at her without giving a positive answer. Could it be that those terrifying ravings really come from an existence who's nearly a god? Mr. Fool can help me eliminate that person's influence, and all this time he's been talking about it in a rather bland tone. Does this mean that he and that existence's life's natural order are at the same level? The more she thought about it, the more shocked she became. Even her body couldn't stop trembling. Klein waited a few seconds, then asked, "How long does it last every full moon?" 3 to 5 minutes. If it's the night of the blood moon, it will exceed 7 minutes. Furs gathered her thoughts and answered honestly. The more Klein listened, the more he felt that the raving's owner belonged to Mr. Dorr. He temporarily put the matter down and smiled. "You can return in a few minutes. There is only one way to solve your problem, and that is to raise your life's natural order." Furs hesitated for a moment before saying, "Whenever I encounter the full moon, can I recite your name? I will be your devout believer." "No, there's no need." Klein smiled and shook his head. "But I don't mind helping you along the way. Thank you so much." Although she suspected that she was dealing with an evil god, she no longer wanted to experience the same painful nightmare as before. After confirming this matter, she relaxed a lot. Noticing that there were still many seats around the long bronze table, she asked probingly, "Mr. Fool, it seems there are others who come here frequently?" "No, they might not necessarily be human." Furs added silently. Klein smiled and said with a casual attitude, "There are few people who are similar to you. I pulled them here for various reasons. They hope that I can hold a gathering at regular intervals to facilitate the trade of formulas, ingredients, information, and missions." I agreed to it. Furs was enticed by what she heard. Thinking that she was already part of this, she boldly asked, "Mr. Fool, can I join this gathering?" "Sure. 3 in the afternoon on Mondays. Remove all disturbances." Klein smiled and pointed at the cards that suddenly appeared on the surface of the long bronze table. "They've decided to use the names of the tarot cards as their code names. You can pick one of these, but these already belong to someone and you cannot choose from." Furs nodded her head, shuffling the cards and cutting them with great interest while mumbling, "Let fate arrange my title." Soon she pulled out a card and looked at it. The Magician.